Every summer, thousands of holidaymakers flock here to the British seaside to enjoy the warm weather, the pebble beaches and the amusement arcades. But there's another side to these shores, a sinister underbelly of violence and murder, where sins are washed away in the tide and where the seafront is stalked by sadistic killers who, like the ocean itself, have no respect for human life. My name's Dr. Nell Darby. I've written extensively about the history of crime, researching the reasons why people kill. Over the course of my career, I've developed a keen eye for spotting trends in a killer's behaviour. Nowhere are these trends more striking than in the not-so-sunny seaside towns of Britain's coastline, which have always seemed to attract an extraordinarily high number of murderous rogues. In this series of Murder by the Sea, I examine a selection of chilling new cases, many of which have never been featured on television before. Join me on a journey to the cliff's edge, where the land meets the sea, and where life meets death. They say that the pen is mightier than the sword. So it literally proves in today's Murder by the Sea, as we look at the case of Rebecca Love, killed by a student with a pen for a weapon.
The port of Hull, more formally Kingston upon Hull, lies on the Humber Estuary, the big waterway that flows out into the North Sea. It's been a maritime trading port since probably the 12th or 13th century, when monks in a nearby monastery used it as the way to ship out wool they had produced in their monastery to the continent.
Within Hull in 2007, the city was regenerating itself, really. There was a feel to the city that things were getting better after a lull from the fishing industry collapsing and other things like that that had occurred in the city. People were beginning to think it wasn't such a bad place to live in at that time. It did look as though it was improving.
The University of Hull, and Hull College, which is associated with it, has been in existence since the 1920s and had a royal charter since 1954. It is a campus-style university. Its buildings are dotted around the city, not in the centre, but in the suburbs, if you like.
Universities, from my own experience, are fantastic places in that you go and learn how to be independent, but at the same time you still got some sort of structure in place. If you're a resident in a hall of residence, you're surrounded by other students, you feel that you've got people there to look out for you. And then you get these two worlds colliding between this freedom that university offers and at the same time this lack of kind of parental attention that students get in halls of residence or elsewhere on campus.
The Lawns, until it closed in 2018, was one of the main campus of halls of residence, providing accommodation for students.
The flats were basically 4 bedrooms and a combined kitchen area and shower area and that sort of thing. So it was like 4 people together on one floor. All had their own private room but shared like a communal kitchen and communal washing areas where washing machines were down in the basement.
Until it closed in 2018, it housed around 1,000 students a year. Of those, the only student ever to have been murdered at the Lawns was Rebecca Love.
I'm Tony Garton. I'm an ex-Detective Chief Inspector from the Humberside Police. I always wanted to be a police officer from being about 14 at school. I just wanted to play cops and robbers for real, and the fact of catching people really appealed to me. I was never one for an office job, and in fact, over the 35 years I had in the police force, I only spent about 6 months on an office-based job. I was always outside, it was always practical policing, and it was always dealing with the public, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. It stands as one of the best cases I've dealt with, but through no skill of mine. It was a team effort, and I was just happened to be the leader of the team, but the person that detected this crime, without any shadow of a doubt, was the forensic scientist. And they painstakingly stayed at that scene for 2 days, collecting evidence and collecting the right evidence.
Rebecca was 26, slightly older than most students at the university and the college. She was taking a foundation course at Hull College with the intention of going on to a full 3-year degree in marine biology at Hull University.
She was obviously older than the majority of the students, so she was perceived to be a little bit of a loner. She stayed in and she did the studies. I suppose at 19 and she was 26, the age difference is quite a lot, and she had the maturity that maybe they didn't.
On Friday, May the 4th, 2007, security officers knocked on the door of Rebecca Love's room at the Lawns. Rebecca's mother, Carol, had raised the alarm when she hadn't been able to contact her daughter. Rebecca came from a close-knit family and she was in contact with her parents most days.
She last rang her mother on Wednesday the 2nd of May, and all day Thursday there was no contact with Rebecca, which she thought was unusual. She became concerned and tried to ring Rebecca on a mobile phone and couldn't get a reply. And on Friday, when she still hadn't heard from Rebecca, her mother rang the university, and the university had security go around to check her room.
When they got no reply from knocking on her door, the security officers used a master key to enter the room. What they found inside was a murder scene.
It was about 3:30 on the Friday afternoon, and I'd just got to my local golf course at 3:30. I was on call for the weekend, and my phone went, and they told me that they'd found a body of a female in the Lawns residential students' residence in Cottingham, and I had to attend the scene there. The Lawns is fairly spread out, and we'd sealed off the block where Rebecca lived. Obviously some students couldn't get into the block, but it only inconvenienced maybe 16 students. And with it being the Friday night before the bank holiday weekend, some had gone home. So it was surprisingly quiet, which was good for us, but we obviously set up a cordon and wouldn't let anybody into that block. And the word did get out that there'd been an incident and that a student had been found dead, and the police were dealing with it as a suspicious incident.
With the police at the scene, despite extensive inquiries, no one came forward to report hearing the attack.
The first thing we saw was that there'd been no forced entry to the flat, and then we found Rebecca's body. She'd obviously been assaulted many times, and other than that, most things seemed to be in place within the room. Nothing was obviously knocked over or anything like that.
It was immediately clear that she had been subjected to a prolonged and vicious attack. Her body bore 93 separate stab wounds on her neck, on her face, even right in the back of her throat. And the wounds, from the shape of them, appeared to have been inflicted with something like a ballpoint pen.
The injuries had unusual characteristics. They were like a hexagonal penetrating injury, and it was found that that injury was caused by a big biro. It was the cylinder of the shaft of the pen that had penetrated her body. And so that unusual feature, that unusual characteristic is quite key in this investigation because it tells us about the weapon that's been used.
Rebecca had obviously used a biro at the house, and she must have had a habit of biting the top of the pen or putting it in her mouth and holding it in her teeth. And the black plastic stopper that's in the top had come out and wasn't there. And the top edge of that pen was rather sharp. It later transpired that biro was found on the coffee table in the room, but when it was found, the hexagonal shape of the biro, there was a piece of skin in the top of it.
When that force of penetration had been kind of applied, the pen had actually stuck into the hand of the assailant. So on one end of the pen, they recovered skin fragments that were consistent with those of the assailant. The energy of that attack is such that it's causing not only enough force to penetrate the victim's body, but actually it's had the reverse effect and it's also injuring the assailant.
I don't feel that it's a kind of premeditated act in terms of, right, I'm going to kill her, then I'm going to do this to make the scene appear a certain way. I do feel that there's an element of panic in there and of not thinking straight. It's over killing, it's over violence. There's no need to do all the things that he's doing in order to kill Rebecca. You know, it's complete overkill.
Itself quite clumsy, so it certainly wasn't something that necessarily he'd planned to go to those lengths. Certainly there's something that's been building up in him for some time.
It wasn't a messy scene, but it was obviously one that was odd because she was on the floor in the living room and nothing seemed to be disturbed. Rebecca was, to be blunt about it, battered and bruised, rather than there was no blood spillage or anything like that anywhere.
As the police and crime scene technicians processed the room in which Rebecca died, they found evidence of numerous people's DNA. That was not exactly unexpected. In any hall of residence, you're going to find the DNA of numerous students.
Rebecca had a total of 93 injuries, ranging from bruising to her face and upper body, basically. The official cause of her death, when we did have the post-mortem, was like asphyxiation, but it wasn't strangulation. It was more like she'd been sat on and suffocated in that manner, that she'd been laid on and couldn't breathe because there was no strangulation marks or anything like that.
When they examined her hands, they found that under her fingernails, Rebecca had flakes of skin. That's a telltale sign of someone who has tried to fight off her attacker.
If somebody's got all those injuries, you would expect things to have been upturned and that and the one thing and another. So we actually got a forensic scientist as well as a pathologist down to the scene. Before we moved Rebecca's body, the scientist was able to carry out certain tests and one thing and another. And she was concerned that things didn't look right, and she was concerned that things had happened. The body remained in situ till late the next day, on the Saturday. And the scientists took a lot of samples and a lot of exhibits from the house, which in the end proved invaluable.
There was something odd about what they found on her body itself. It appeared to have been washed down or cleaned crudely with what appeared to be either fabric softener or washing liquid.
So given her injuries in this case, then obviously there would have been blood staining available at the crime scene. And it's not uncommon actually for an assailant to react to that after the act is complete and think, I need to clean this up, I need to cover my tracks. And so in this particular case, he's taken some steps to do a deep clean, but he's been quite sloppy. He's left lots of material that is available for crime scene examiners to recover and record and start to fill in the gaps of what happened before that clean-up. It's exceptionally difficult to clean up a crime scene, especially one in which there has been bloodshed. Because the thing, in terms of a forensic approach, we have technology available to us which everyone on the street, they wouldn't recognise the power and ability of our techniques. So we can find blood staining and other trace materials that are not visible to the naked eye. So when people make an effort to clean a crime scene, visibly they might think they've done quite a good job, but forensically there is still the potential to find enough evidence within that crime scene that they've overlooked or missed.
He'd actually tried to clean Rebecca's body up and the scene with a bottle of Febreze fabric conditioner, and he left a thumbprint in Rebecca's blood on the bottle.
In forensic science, we've had fingerprint technology for centuries, so it is unusual that someone wouldn't be aware of the fact that they might be leaving fingerprints in a crime scene. But of course, once they've had this act, once they've had this attack, it's possible that they're not thinking clearly about how they would get rid of every trace of evidence, and so fingerprint evidence is often found at crime scenes.
He'd not been in any previous bother, so the police didn't have a record of his fingerprints at the time. We knew the parents had rung in and said that they'd not heard from us, so we sent a team to the parents' address to inform them of what had been found and obviously offer comfort to them.
There was one other odd but eventually incriminating piece of evidence in Rebecca Love's room. The police found a handwritten note, and that note appeared to incriminate Rebecca's boyfriend back in her hometown of Wath-on-Dearne.
Rebecca's family were very involved in a spiritualist church. There was a lad at the church who was friendly with Rebecca. They weren't boyfriend-girlfriend as such, but I think the lad would have wished to be, but Rebecca had told him the same as she told Jason Webster. She didn't want a permanent relationship, she didn't want a strong relationship because she was more bothered about doing her studies. But Rebecca had agreed that he could come over to Cottingham, have a look at where she was and stay the weekend. In the meantime, I was more concerned with Rebecca's mobile phone because it could contain some evidence, and got onto the phone company and they were able to tell us what the last text messages were and the last usage on the phone was. The phone was switched off. I don't know whether it had been damaged or destroyed because we never did find Rebecca's phone.
Whoever killed Rebecca Love was unlikely to be an experienced criminal. The attempt to cover his tracks had been far too amateurish and haphazard. And so they began interviewing Rebecca's friends and co-students at the college and the university.
She'd had contact with Jason Webster by mobile phones in the early hours of Thursday morning.
Jason Webster was 21. He was a second-year history student at the university. He came from what the tabloids would later describe as a good middle-class family.
He didn't attend all his lectures, he wasn't doing all his work, and his tutors were mindful that they may not ask him to continue with his second year of his studies because he was so poor at attending the lectures and doing the work.
In terms of his psychopathology, he's certainly got a slight hint of narcissism about him. He certainly seems to be somebody who wants to be in control. He seems himself someone who's of a high social standing even. So certainly in terms of somebody who's made advances towards somebody and had those rejected, he wouldn't have taken that nicely. And he would have picked people out who were less likely perhaps to reject him, and that he would sort of go into that sort of spiral really of picking them out and not wanting to get in that situation of rejection again.
He seemed to want to be the centre of attention, always telling his mates how good he was at things and that. I mean, say for an example, on the Wednesday night when he'd arranged to see Rebecca, there was a Champions League football match on between AC Milan and Manchester United, and he said he would watch that in the Gardener's Arms public house on Cottingham Road, opposite the university, with two of his student friends. And then he would come straight after the match to the lawns and see Rebecca. We got onto his mobile company, got the messages from him to confirm it was him that was using the phone at the time. Then we went onto the university, found out where Jason lived, went to the flat where he was living, and there was nobody there, and they said he was out in the town going around the clubs on that Friday night. Only 2 days since he'd murdered Rebecca.
Interviews with Rebecca's friends revealed that she had met Jason Webster a few months earlier in a nightclub in Hull, and the two had become friendly. They'd had a casual relationship, but according to Rebecca's friends, she had told Webster that she didn't want a relationship. For her, her academic studies were too important to be distracted by having a relationship. As the police later explained, she was adamant her studies came first.
Rebecca was a mature student. Focused on her studies, she rarely socialised with many of the other students in the halls. You tend to find men like Webster will target people they identify as being different, as being vulnerable, who appear to have fewer ties to other people, friendships, things like that, because they want to isolate these women, to make them dependent on them. They think that they're going to be more successful with these women because they are flattered by the attention. It's that kind of feeling that, oh, you haven't got anybody, you must want me. And that they will seek to isolate you further, to make you dependent on them. And certainly in Rebecca's case, there's been much written about how she was almost socially isolated. She was more focused on her studies, so she was more on her own than other students who were younger and had more in common with each other. And he kind of identified that as being a weakness, a vulnerability in her, and so kind of focused his attention on her.
So when we see people who perhaps are a little bit more vulnerable or maybe just a bit shy or socially anxious, they often gravitate towards people who will bring that out of them a little bit. And he could clearly recognise this was probably a pattern of behaviour, that he realised that you pick off this kind of type of person. This was probably something that he learnt very quickly and was able to do. And it afforded him some ability to be more dominant in the relationship, to be able to interact with people that were perhaps, beyond his normal sort of social group.
Obviously, she was slightly older than the average student. She was in her 20s, she was 26. But at the same time, that's still quite young to be kind of dealing with all these emotions, with all the pressures of university life. Even not taking into account kind of attention from an individual where you don't quite know how to tell him that you don't want a relationship with him anymore, or you're not ready for a serious relationship. What happens when you change your mind about wanting to be with an individual? Have you got that support in place, that courage in place to say no without worrying that I haven't got a close network with rejection? You owe him sex, you owe him time. And in Jason Webster's case, it's sudden that after having drinks, he felt he deserved success with women to violence. Jason Webster had been seen at Rebecca's halls of residence on the night of the murder, so the police went to bring him in for interview.
I didn't interview Jason Webster, the interview team did. We had a process where we could watch the interview as it was going on, and To be honest, Jason Webster just completely denied any knowledge of Rebecca's murder. He did admit that he had gone to her flat in the early hours of the 3rd of May, that would be the Thursday morning, and he said that he'd visited her, they'd had sex, and then he left. He vehemently denied it for the best part of 6 months, and he also denied it to his parents, which was upsetting for them in some respects, because his father was allowed to interview him after he'd been charged and before he went to prison on remand. His father told us afterwards, he says, well, I believe him. I absolutely believe him, because I've told him, if he has done it, for goodness sake, tell the police, we'll stand by you and we'll get it sorted out, but it'll be better for you. And his dad said, he just said, Dad, I haven't.
With Webster, I do wonder about the impact of his family on him refusing to admit guilt. I know that his father had asked him to confess and said, look, you know, if you did it, I will stick by you. And he still couldn't confess. And I think it's that feeling that if I tell my family what I've done, then I'm kind of really showing that I've let them down. I've ruined their expectations of me. This is a man from a good family, a history student at a good university, and suddenly he's done this absolutely appalling crime, and he can't even admit it to himself. If he admits it to his family, if he admits it to anybody, then he can't hide what he's done anymore. He can't pretend that he's still this good man with good prospects. He's admitting that he's ruined everything, not only for him, but for Rebecca's family, for his own family.
Although he's committed this crime and he's left quite literally with blood on his hands, he still then tries to manipulate the situation. So it shows a certain callousness towards him, certainly elements of psychopathy in terms of he has no real empathy for his victim, and all he really is bothered about at this stage is kind of trying to manipulate the situation to save his own skin.
He was always adamant in the interview. He just said, no, I didn't touch her. We put the injuries on the back of his hand to him, and he just said, I did that when I fell over a small wall going to the university. Both his parents fully believed it, and to be honest, they paid for the barrister and his defence, really. And at one point, they nearly applied for bail.
The detectives established that Webster had indeed been out on a heavy drinking session night in Hull's pubs and clubs on the night in question. They found that he had boasted to his friends that he was going on from there and was determined to pick up a woman.
That night he had a shirt on with a breast pocket. He had a condom in the breast pocket, and he kept telling his mates, after the football I'm going and I'm going to have sex and all this. So he was telling his mates exactly what he was doing. He'd no respect for Rebecca in any way, shape or form, I don't think. It was just, I'm one of the lads. And then after the football match, his mates were going to the Students' Union on Cottingham Road, and there were some female friends of his friends came as well, and he decided that he would stay with them because there was more girls than men, and he thought his chances were most probably better with them. When Jason did leave the Students' Union, he actually shared a cab to go to the lawns with two other students that were in residence there, and they came forward very quickly and said, well, we shared a taxi with the bloke that got there about 1 o'clock, and he was talking about, and he was saying he was a history student. So I think, although the mobile phone evidence found him the quickest, once we'd found those two students, we would have found Jason anyhow, I think.
Evidence from Rebecca's phone showed that she had texted Webster earlier in the evening saying, don't come round tonight. Jason Webster wasn't the sort of young man to take no for an answer. He went to Rebecca's room that night, determined to have sex with her, whether she wanted to or not.
I'm sure it happened very quickly, and to be quite honest, I would imagine that Rebecca had said something that really upset Jason. She didn't want to let him into the flat in the first place because that was obvious from the text. She obviously did let him in the end because there was no forced entry into the flat. I think she maybe told him then that she couldn't have him coming round at this time in the morning, 2 o'clock, being drunk and one thing and another. I would think she's told him that there's a lad coming at the weekend that he's coming to stay, and she didn't really want to see him anymore. And then I think he must have really lost it.
Webster was blaming Rebecca for being interested in another man, which he had every right to be. He did not own her. It was not, a serious relationship by any stretch of the imagination. But it's this kind of, if I can't have you, nobody can, but also I'm going to then blacken your name and make out that you have some sort of responsibility for your own death. It's part of this needing to be in control. He wants to control the narrative and actually rewrite the story, portraying Rebecca in a way that does not reflect what she was really like.
Jason Webster had obviously found out about this lad coming at the weekend, and he'd left a note in Rebecca's flat implying that this lad had been across on the Wednesday night. Which, when you think about it, didn't really make sense because Jason didn't get to the flat until about 1 o'clock Thursday morning. But he'd certainly written a note on a paper. It was confusing, really, but he'd left a note sort of implying that this new man had been across at the flat that Wednesday.
The production of that letter demonstrates that there's this kind of chaotic reaction to the circumstances, and also it's part of how do I cover the tracks. So the writing of that letter seems to me to be indicating that this person is just trying to kind of chaotically find a way to cover what they've done.
I don't think he ever thought it was a spontaneous thing, but once it happened, he certainly thought about what he did after he'd killed Rebecca, and that showed quite a level of knowledge as to destroy the mobile phone, clean the scene, clean the body, and in fairness, if he hadn't have been so drunk, he maybe wouldn't have left as much evidence as he did do at the scene. We never did find the shirt. He must have destroyed his shirt at some point. He bought a new pair of jeans on the Thursday and took Rebecca's mobile phone with him and the key to the flat because he locked the flat, neither of which we ever found. The evidence that led us to charging Jason Webster was the fingerprint on the Febreze bottle, because once he was in custody we took his fingerprints and it was quickly discovered that fingerprint in blood on the bottle, A, it was Rebecca's blood, and B, it was Jason Webster's thumbprint. So that was the evidence that allowed us to charge him the following Monday, the 8th of May, and he remained in custody ever since then. But obviously, just because you've charged somebody, your evidence gathering goes way on beyond that, and we were still gathering evidence. When he went to the Students' Union, there was some photography students that were obviously trying to make a little bit of pocket money for themselves. You could have your picture taken for £1. Went through all the digital images that they took, and we found this one of Webster, his two friends and these girls. And in the photograph we noticed he was wearing the watch, which, to be fair, at that point we hadn't recovered. He'd actually gone into his property and was at the prison when we recovered it. We recovered it from the prison, and it was found to still have specimens of Rebecca's blood on the strap.
When anybody sustains a bleeding injury, then obviously there's an expectation or a hope that blood would transfer to the perpetrator. And that's kind of the one of the threads throughout the investigation. And of course, if someone then has tried to clean themselves, then they might discard clothing, they might wash, they might have a shower to try and remove any trace of material. But oftentimes, in cases of violent assault, we find that blood and body material can be trapped in jewellery. And that can be quite an unusual finding because people don't pay attention to that kind of item. And in this particular case, his watch was recovered, and under magnification, we were looking for traces of blood, and they discovered minute traces of blood within the links of the watch. So the finding of blood in this case that matched Rebecca Love was a key finding in this investigation, because it demonstrates that his watch has been exposed to her blood, and that obviously then places a timestamp on it which puts him and his jewellery in a scene where her blood is available. And so that is almost certainly one of the key links in this case.
And another piece of evidence that later come out, Jason had some scratches on the back of his hand, and he said that he'd fallen over because he'd had too much to drink watching the football, and he fell over a small wall when they were going to the Students' Union. However, when we got this photograph of them, you could clearly see on the photograph that Jason's back of his hand was uninjured, so it obviously.
What makes me particularly sad about this case is the fact that Rebecca's body went undiscovered for 24 hours, and it could have been longer if her mother hadn't actually realised there was something wrong. I think universities since have become better at recognising.
So we managed to keep the lid on it with the help of the university, the help of the students, and it didn't get to sort of people fretting about was there a murderer on the loose in the lawns, because it just wasn't the case. It didn't really have the effect that it could have had if we hadn't have been so quick in charge. The fingerprint on the bottle and the blood in the watch, it was pretty much, well, basically game, set and match. He went for a pre-trial hearing, which was 7 days before the commencement of his trial, and his defence barrister obviously told him, if you plead not guilty to this, I don't think I can represent you, really, because the evidence is so overwhelming.
A pathologist gave evidence, and his testimony was damning. He said the attack which had killed Rebecca Love had been so prolonged, so frenzied, and so vicious that it amounted to a form of torture.
Rebecca's parents, they couldn't listen to the evidence of the attack, and they couldn't listen to the pathologist's report. They left the court crying. They came back in later, but it was a shock, really. But the whole day was a shock, really, because we expected him to put in a plea of not guilty, and obviously, on seeing the evidence, he changed his plea. Rebecca's parents said it wasn't a relief because the whole incident had ruined their lives, a brother's life, and also Jason Webster's life and his parents' lives. And they were very sort of philosophical about it, really, and said, it's just been a complete waste. So there wasn't a relief because they just said, our lives will never be the same.
What would have been an extended and very painful trial for Rebecca's family became foreshortened. It became a hearing about how long Jason Webster should serve for this vicious, brutal murder.
Sometimes people are bragging about what they've done, but I think sometimes it's a human instinct to want to talk to somebody about what you've done, especially when it's something so enormous. And really, that you should be keeping quiet about it. It's the last thing you should be mentioning. And that kind of makes you want or need to talk about it more. You want to kind of almost act like it's a confession. You need to explain to somebody what you've done. But also with him, you have to remember that this is a man who's he wants to be seen as more successful than he is. He wants to be seen as this powerful man who's irresistible to women. And this kind of murder of a vulnerable woman puts him in that position of power. So at the same time, there's this kind of element of, well, I didn't mean to do it, but actually now I kind of want to show off about it because I've shown that I am in control. I am more powerful than a woman because look what I did.
Typically, for this arrogant, privileged young man, he tried in court to play down all of this evidence. He came up with a cock and bull story about what had happened and how he had come to jab the biro into Rebecca's face and neck. He said he had actually done so to try and save her life, and he said the same thing about wiping her body down with the fabric softener or washing liquid. That was a way not of covering up the evidence, that I was trying to revive her, he told the judge. Well, the judge didn't believe a word of it. He said Webster had told, his words, a pack of lies, and he sentenced him to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 21 years.
The fact that he's never shown any remorse for the crime hints at a more complex personality where perhaps this desire to control women, to be seen as sexually powerful, sexually successful, was kind of exposed by the drink, but it was always something that was present.
Within the kind of prison system, lots of people undergo sort of therapies and programs, and one of the big things that they have to confront is their guilt of their crimes and show some remorse for what they've done, and it's a process of developing that understanding. But he's really not been able to do that at this stage, and it does really imply that there's still some level of potential dangerousness there in terms of he's either unwilling to or unable to accept what he's done. So it would really imply that it does pose some danger still to society.
The forensic evidence in this case was absolutely key because it demonstrated a forensic link between him and her injuries and her blood. And so that places us in a position where we can effectively demonstrate that he had a part to play in her murder.
Rebecca Love had a bright academic future ahead of her, but Jason Webster's refusal to accept her rejection of him had tragic consequences and ensured she would never get the future.
Vội đi mau để khi ngoảnh lại đưa về anh chẳng tính công dẫu mai em có lấy chồng anh xin làm người đưa sao qua sông. Thời gian trôi đi nhanh quá, tiếng yêu tôi chưa kịp xếp vần. Một kia lư tre cuối xóm, chẳng thấy em chiều nay đi về. Hỏi ra mời hai chim sao đã sang sông sao đi lấy chồng. Còn đâu nhưng chưa theo bước, giờ chỉ có anh lẻ loi đi về. Ai đem chim sáo qua sông để cho chim sáo xô lòng xa xăm đi về. Sao ơi bay chữ ngồi đây chờ ai chờ, thôi rồi hết đời hết trông. Trách cho số kiếp bon bèo duyên kia chẳng đặng thì đành nhìn sao sang sông. Thời gian trôi đi nhanh quá, tiếng yêu tôi chưa kịp xếp phần. Một ngày kia lúc tre cuối xóm, chẳng thấy em chiều nay đi về. Hỏi ra mời hai chim sao đã sang sông sao đi lấy chồng. Còn đâu nhưng chiều theo bước, giờ chỉ có anh lại lối đi về. Ai đem chim sào sang sông để cho chim sào xô lòng bay xa. Sao bay bỏ lại mình ta bơ vơ một nẻo xa xăm đi về. Sao ơi bây chưa ngồi đây chờ ai chờ hết đời rồi chẳng trách cho duyên số bon bèo duyên kia chẳng đặng thì đành như sao quang sông. Trách cho số kiếm bon bèo duyên kia chẳng đặng thì đành như sao sáng sông.
Marinette County, Wisconsin, 1976. In an area thought to be safe for campers, a loving couple meets a cruel end.
David was deceased outside of a rustic campground toilet.
He had been shot once in the neck, but once was all it took. This was a fatal shot with a lot of blood.
400 yards away, in ferns and bushes and brush in the woods, they found the female victim.
She too had been killed by 2 shots, but not until after she had been raped.
What could drive a person to commit such a monstrous act?
This was sexually motivated. He wanted to sexually assault Ellen, but he had to get rid of David to do that.
Campers report sightings of a mysterious individual lurking in the park.
They saw an individual walking out of the woods carrying a rifle.
2 people killed. The woman is brutally raped. The people in the community would be afraid and shocked and dismayed that it would happen here.
Police follow all leads, but the case turns cold.
They worked on it very, very hard for several years and followed several leads, and nothing seemed to pan out.
Police just ran out of options, ran out of possibilities, and nothing further could be done.
It seems the killer got away with it. That is, until new forensic science becomes available. Criminals who have hidden in the shadows for years find there's no escaping science and their own family DNA. Welcome to Bloodline Detectives. McClintock County Park, a scenic natural park located in Marinette County, Wisconsin. In 1976, it's a popular spot for camping and outdoor activities.
Marinette County is a very rural area in northeastern Wisconsin. A large portion of it is wooded. It has a large county national forest.
McClintock County Park has a small campground on the south part of it, and north part of it there's another parking area. There's some hiking trails there.
It's a very, very secluded park. It's kind of a big circular driveway that has little offshoots that are campsites. It's maybe a 1 acre park. It borders a little creek.
But in this seemingly serene park, a shocking discovery is about to be made.
On July 9th, 1976, a park caretaker, his name was Stanley, he went into the camp area, and when he got to the restroom, which is basically like an outhouse, he saw a body.
It's not the type of thing anybody would normally find or see, and I would assume that he was terrified and kind of shaken and didn't really know what to do.
He went up to the mail and couldn't get a response, and so there was no telephone in McClintock Park at that time. And right after he made this discovery, there was another man, Lance Temper. He and his girlfriend were happened to drive through the McClintock Park camping area, and Stanley flagged him down and said, "Hey, there's this man over here that's not responsive." Lance Temper was actually an off-duty Marinette police officer. And so Lance Temper went over and discovered that the male was deceased. And so Stanley, after hearing that, drove up to Goodman Park, which had a telephone, and that's about a 10-minute drive.
After rushing to Goodman Park, Stanley comes across the payphone.
And so then Stanley went up and called Marinette County Dispatch and was received at like 2:53 p.m. The first patrol officer was Deputy Giroux, and so he went there and, yes, helped to secure the scene basically with tape, indicating that it was a police scene and then people could not enter without authorization.
They knew enough that this was probably going to be a big enough scene that they needed to contact the State Division of Justice. So basically they had just secured the scene that night as it was getting close to dark when most help was able to arrive, and waited until the crime lab and Department of Justice arrived in the morning.
When they arrived and they saw the body of the male by the women's restroom there, they looked around. Basically what he was wearing was a t-shirt, some shorts. He had a camera that had been around his neck. He had a hat that was not on his head anymore, but was on the ground next to him.
Items of clothing that may be damp or whatever, you want to make sure that you put those in paper bags and preserve them, not in plastic bags. If you put them in plastic bags, the evidence will deteriorate quickly. The sheriff's office did an excellent job of preserving the crime scene and immediately requesting a field response unit from the Wisconsin State Crime Laboratory, rather than trying to pick up things on their own that they may or may not have handled appropriately.
They also found a wallet as well, and that was significant because if it had been a robbery, then they would have expected that valuables would have been taken, and that was not the case.
They found a billfold that had his identification in it, and they got his name off of that.
The male victim was identified as David Schuldes.
After identifying the homicide victim, detectives search the area for more evidence. They discover a nearby tent where further horror awaits them.
When the officers went and viewed the tent, they were able to determine that there was probably a female who was with him, but not, of course, located at the scene at that time.
Now, Lance Temper had gone to the campsite. There was a car, an AMC Gremlin, and had looked inside the car, and he noted a female's purse inside the car. But at that point, they did not locate the female.
It was shortly after they began the search that they did locate the body of Ellen Matthews. They located her about 150 yards away from David, and he was in a wooded area, and she was partially clothed.
There was a short sleeve summer weight sweater that was partially over her head. It appeared to investigators that she was possibly had been stripped because the undergarments were gone, but the shorts were partially on.
They did locate her underwear about 10 to 15 feet away from the body.
In Wisconsin, the coroner is called to the scene of any unexpected death and any violent death. The coroner makes the pronouncement of death. The bodies would have been transported to Madison.
During the autopsy, they're looking for the cause and manner of death.
It was determined that David Schultes died pretty much immediately with a gunshot wound to the neck. Ellen Matthews, it was determined that she had died from 2 gunshot wounds, one to the chest, one to the upper abdomen.
She likely was shot in the abdomen first. That would not have killed her. It would have dropped her to the ground. The shot that likely would have killed her would have been the shot to the right breast, going out the left breast, because it transected the aorta and the heart.
Because of some of the scrapes and scratches and cuts and the semen found in her shorts, it pretty much determined that there was a sexual assault that occurred. By all accounts from the parents and from her friends and family, she would not have fought back. She was one that was not into confrontation. She was very meek, mild-mannered. At one point, she had even had a conversation with her mother about if something would ever have happened like that, would she fight back? And she replied, no, she would just let it happen and pray to God that she lived to get through it.
Marinette County detectives attend the funerals of both victims on the off chance they notice attendees acting suspiciously.
They went to the young couple's funeral and were vigilant for people who were not members of the family, were not friends, who were hanging out there for what reason? Because sometimes killers do get a kick out of seeing how people react to their crimes, the mourning, the grief that people are suffering. Some of them, shall we say, get off on it.
It's just one more step that police departments and sheriff's offices can take to try and develop information when none exists. It's got to be extremely devastating. I simply can't imagine going through that. I have a young daughter who enjoys camping and goes camping by herself. And every time she does that, I worry about it because of my memory of this case.
The people in the community would be afraid and shocked and dismayed that it would happen here. 2 people killed, the woman is brutally raped, and we don't know who the person is.
Investigators are now on the hunt for suspects in this double homicide, but will their leads be strong enough to catch this cold-blooded killer? In McClintock County Park, Marinette County, Wisconsin, a young couple are brutally murdered on July the 9th, 1976, in the popular camping ground. The victims are identified as a soon-to-be married couple, 25-year-old David Schultes and 24-year-old Ellen Matthews. Schultes had been shot in the neck, and tragically, Matthews had been sexually assaulted before being fatally shot by the killer.
David was a 25-year-old male. He was attending the University of Wisconsin in Green Bay and worked at the Green Bay newspaper. Ellen, she had graduated from the University of Wisconsin Green Bay and worked in the library there. They were a happy young couple and they were engaged.
They had no enemies and they just enjoyed getting out in nature and spending time together.
They like to camp and they like to get away and do things. Appeared by all accounts to just be a young couple in love, planning to be married later that year, and they were excited about that.
In '76, it was pretty rare to see any kind of homicides or violent crimes being committed in Marinette or Marinette County.
It just always stood out to me as like, how could something like this happen there?
In fact, to this day, people don't go to McClintock Park out of fear and because of what had occurred there.
Marinette County detectives appealed to the local community for any information that could lead them to the killer.
They went all over Marinette County to different convenience stores, campgrounds, just any place that people would have frequented, trying to see if anybody saw anyone suspicious or anything suspicious. They did an immense amount of work on the ground to try to develop any type of lead.
People went to Goodman Park a lot more than they did McClintock because of the amenities. There was electricity there was showers and things like that up in that park in the 70s. It was a little more popular with campers to be up there. Our victims attempted to go to that park prior to settling on McClintock Park, but that park was full with campers. One of them being an individual that was camping in Goodman Park at the time. He believed he seen them about 1:30 time frame drive through Goodman Park where he was camping. Later that afternoon, a short time later, him and his family went for a ride and went down to McClintock Park. As they were driving through the park, they did notice the same vehicle. So they made note of it again and said, hey, there's that car again. It was a purple colored Gremlin, and the Gremlin was our victim's car. And they didn't think much of it until, of course, the news broke that there was a double homicide in that park. They arrived approximately 2 p.m. on July 9th, 1976. Set up their camp, put things away. Their tent was very neat and tidy. David did enjoy taking pictures of the wildlife and things like that. So finding him with a camera around his neck, officers at the time believed that they were probably attempting to go for a nature walk and see some of the wildlife in the area. Ellen had to use the bathroom, so she went into one of the outhouses, and when David was waiting outside, somebody from a distance fired a round and shot him through his neck with a high-powered rifle. At that point, Ellen was taken from the bathroom, marched into the wooded area where she was sexually assaulted. After the sexual assault occurred, the suspect allowed her to put her jean shorts back on, and as she was putting her shirt back over her head, when it just got over her head, is when we believe the shots were fired, striking her in the chest and the abdomen, killing her.
A murder like this, in such a peaceful, quiet place of such a young couple, with so few clues, would make people panic, would frighten them into thinking there's someone out there who is killing people, who is still out there doing this, and will he do it again?
As the word got out about the murders in McClintock Park, some information was generated. There was a person that had camped in McClintock Park earlier that week and had said that during the night he heard some noise outside of his camper and was concerned, but he thought it might be a bear. So he had a rifle in his camper, and he opened the door of his camper and fired the shot, and he heard some commotion, and that was the end of that. Never any idea if it was a raccoon, a bear, or a person. There were two other people that came forth with information. They were two police officers from Green Bay, Wisconsin, which is about an hour south of Marinette County. He and his wife and another officer and his wife were there camping prior to the murders in McClintock Park. As they were sitting around a campfire in the evening, they said they noticed a person standing off some distance in the woods. They could see the silhouette of an individual standing there. They started to walk toward that individual, and the person disappeared. So they came back, sat around the campfire some more, got a little bit later in the evening, and noticed a silhouette some distance away in the woods again. That time, instead of going toward the individual, they went to their tent to retrieve their service weapon. When they came back, the individual was gone again. At the time, they thought it was suspicious, but didn't give it a lot of thought until they also learned of the murders in McClintock Park, and at that time, they came forward with that piece of information.
While examining the vicinity of the crime scene, investigators locate a vital piece of evidence.
Investigators recovered a bullet fragment, a jacket from a fence that was outside of the outhouse. That bullet had gone through David's throat, and that one had grooves and striations on it that the crime lab was able to tell our investigators that if you locate this gun, we can positively ID it. So a lot of effort went into looking for a .30 caliber rifle, which is what they determined caused the homicide.
Unfortunately, .30 caliber weapons are extremely common in northern Wisconsin. It's a very common hunting weapon. So in the course of the investigation, we collected a number of weapons, .30 caliber weapons, and submitted them to the crime laboratory, none of which, of course, matched the bullets that were recovered at the scene.
The day after these homicides occurred, 2 young men indicated to their parents that they might have seen the suspect in the case. McClintock Park has a sister park that is actually a walking park. It's about a half a mile north of the campgrounds. And they had stopped there at the time, and they were walking around down by the river when they heard a gunshot.
Sounded like a rifle shot. These were young men that were experienced hunters and grew up around that, so they knew what a rifle shot sounded like.
Those 2 got back in the vehicle, and then they traveled out to the main road, and they drove south towards McClintock Park Campground. As they were driving, they look off to the right, and they see an individual who they described as about 20 to 30 years old, dressed in a military-style jacket, wearing boots, and carrying what they thought was like a .30 caliber rifle. And he was walking through the woods at a pretty good pace. They assumed he was about 15 to 20 feet away from them when they drove by.
Unusual, but not unheard of. People do hunt out of season. That's called poaching. That does happen here. And so that's kind of what they thought was happening. Somebody was hunting out of season.
And didn't give it a whole lot more thought until they heard about the homicide investigation.
So they briefly caught a glimpse of this man and described that man to law enforcement as best they could. Law enforcement engaged the services of a composite artist, and they developed a pretty rudimentary sketch of this person that they saw. There was also, on the other side of the road from where this man had been spotted, the other side of Parkway Road, a Plymouth vehicle, and one of the young men was able to give a partial license plate. It appeared to be like a Michigan license plate.
So obviously, one of the first things that we did was contact the Michigan State Police and got a printout of any license plate that could possibly come up with that combination.
So law enforcement went off what they had, which was this person walking with the .30 caliber rifle and the description and the composite, as well as looking for this vehicle. They went and scoured all of the surrounding campgrounds or convenience stores, any place that may have information where somebody may have driven through. And so then asked people if they had seen a vehicle similar to the one found across the road, if they had seen anyone matching that description or seen anything suspicious at all, or if they had seen Ellen and David. Unfortunately, the leads really weren't significant at that time. The main thing they were focusing on, again, was the composite sketch. That's really the only thing that they had that was solid at the time.
I put together the sightings by the 2 Green Bay police officers and the murders in McClintock Park. I was convinced that it was somebody who was either from the area or had been in the area, or at the very least was very comfortable in the woods. And unfortunately, the 2/3 of northern Wisconsin is a wooded area, and there are lots of people that are comfortable in the woods.
Investigators are unable to identify the mysterious man in the woods. Weeks turn into months without new leads. Despite their best efforts, Marinette County investigators are losing momentum.
In the later 70s, it really dropped off, not due to lack of effort or lack of wanting to solve the crime. They had gone through all the investigative leads that they could, and it didn't lead them anywhere to a resolution.
It was a cold case because of how old it was getting, but it certainly was one that if somebody wanted to say something, if something came our way, it was investigated. So it never really was inactive, but we all had our moments of doubt. Are we ever going to be able to solve this?
The case may be cold, but Marinette detectives do not give up hope of solving this harrowing double homicide. As the years pass, advancements in forensic technology offer newfound hope. Can the killer's DNA unlock the key to this mystery? Marinette County, Wisconsin. On July the 9th, 1976, 25-year-old David Schuldes and his girlfriend, 24-year-old Ellen Matthews, are discovered murdered in McClintock County Park. Both victims tragically died from gunshot wounds. And even more disturbing, Ellen was sexually assaulted prior to her death. The double homicide investigation is underway, but new leads are scarce.
Back in 1976, technology was a little bit different than it is now, and they relied heavily on fingerprints and serology and blood typing. The serology is like the analysis of fluids, and then blood typing, if they have blood available, they can like do a type of like A, B, O, or whatever. And in some fluids, like semen, some men are excretors, and you can determine their blood type because they are excretors.
Typically, the best result comes from a blood sample. However, we also can get very pristine DNA samples from semen.
Using the biological samples taken from Ellen's clothing, investigators identify the blood type of the killer.
All we had was the fact that the person was a type O blood and was a secretor, and unfortunately type O positive is the most common blood type, and so that didn't help us much as far as identifying anyone. It was extremely important that evidence be collected properly. It was extremely critical that our state crime laboratory preserve that evidence, and as long as it was preserved and was able, as technology improved, to eventually develop a DNA profile.
Despite this solid lead, the case once again turns cold. Then, in the mid-90s, a new generation of detectives pull the infamous case off the shelf.
Detective Sergeant Craig Bates, he was tasked with investigating the old homicide cases that were not resolved in Marinette County, and one of them was the McClintock County Park homicides. The early 90s was kind of the start of using DNA in police work.
Detective Bates learns about advancements in DNA profiling and considers whether an updated analysis of the biological sample can lead to a suspect.
And he took some of the evidence from the case and sent it to a couple of different labs throughout the country that did DNA analysis, and they were able to develop a DNA profile from the semen that was in the shorts. That profile was entered into the CODIS, which is Combined DNA Identification System. It's a computerized database for known offenders and for unknown suspects, and they kind of compare them on a regular basis. So if you have an unknown suspect profile, you import that into the DNA database, and if it matches, you'll get a notification that there's a match.
The results were negative. We weren't able to connect our suspect's DNA with any other suspects in the United States or any other crimes in the United States. Either the suspect committed another homicide and was in prison and never did have to give his DNA, or the suspect was dead, or maybe on the off end that somebody who did something this heinous maybe just didn't do it again and never was caught. So ultimately we knew our suspect in the case had never had to submit any kind of DNA to the state.
Despite being unable to locate a match to the suspect profile in the CODIS database, investigators make progress in 2018 thanks to a DNA technology company based in Virginia.
Parabon is a genetic technology company. So they do a number of things, and those include snapshot phenotyping, where they can predict someone's physical traits based on their DNA. So hair color, eye color, shape, face, skin color. If they are contracted to do so from law enforcement, they can create an image that is an approximation of what someone would look like, just based on their DNA. So it's not meant to be a photographic image of somebody. However, it should be consistent with that person's traits.
Detective Baldwin came in to see me and said, "We need to talk about this." We want your take on this. This is something we should pursue in this case because we have this profile. When I started watching what Parabon Nanolabs was doing and CeCe Moore's work and her associates' work, I almost came off of my chair. I remember thinking, my goodness, yes, we have to do that.
We primarily work cases where there's an unidentified violent criminal, a rapist or a murderer. Many of these cases are very old. They've been cold cases for years or decades. We also work some more active cases. So what we are trying to do is help law enforcement identify the person responsible for a violent crime. And if it's a more active case, we might even be able to help them stop that criminal in their tracks.
Then we coordinated with the crime lab and them to provide the DNA sample to them so they could do their work on it.
And Parabon did do a phenotype sketch of the suspect based on the DNA found in Ellen Matthews' shorts.
They told us that it was a male primarily of Northern European descent, fair complected, either like reddish or light brown hair, blue eyes, and probably had some freckling. It was like 40 years after the event, so if he was 25 at the time, 65 would have been his approximate age, we thought, when we conducted the sketch through Parabon. After we did get that sketch, we had a press conference and put that out to the TV stations.
To the newspapers and to the public, asking if there were any new leads or information that could be generated based on the suspect, having these particular physical characteristics.
And we developed probably about 70 leads from various people. We started to track down these people and talk to them. Hey, what do you know about this case? Would you be willing to consent to give us DNA to compare in the case?
And we were able to go out and swab each one of those individuals. None of the 70, of course, ever hit on the DNA profile that our suspect had.
The suspect is yet to be found, but investigators continue in progressing the case. They team up with Parabon Nanolabs once again to try a revolutionary forensic technique that is cracking the coldest of cold cases across the country.
So when Parabon told us about the sketch and the genetics of the person, they said another service they do is this investigative genetic genealogy, and they told us that based on the person's DNA, they could compare DNA to people that are in other databanks and try to match DNA and build family trees from that.
I'm one of the early pioneers of using autosomal DNA to help people learn more about their family tree and their genetic heritage. Autosomal DNA is the type of DNA you inherit from all of your great-grandparents back to your third and fourth great-grandparents. So you inherit 50% from your mother and your father, everyone does, about 25% from each of your grandparents, and about 12.5% from each great-grandparent. And so it can inform us about all the different branches of your family tree. And it became apparent very early on in my work that this incredibly powerful tool for human identification was applicable to law enforcement cases, both unidentified human remains and identifying unknown violent criminals.
On December the 21st, 2018, Parabon Nanolabs provide Marinette County investigators with a strong lead. The genealogists have generated a pool of suspects using the killer's DNA. They suspect he belongs to the Van Evenhoven family from the Green Bay area, Wisconsin.
They had a number of children, including 4 sons. They looked at the Van Evenhoven sons in the beginning of 2019.
Todd Baldwin was the primary lead investigator in this case, and the first of the brothers that they focused on was the closest in age to what we thought the person was, and they wound up doing a garbage or a trash pick at his house.
As soon as he put the garbage out, me and another detective went, obtained the garbage.
And they went through it and they developed things out of the garbage that they thought would contain DNA.
One of them being an inhaler.
The DNA collected from that garbage pull, it was in the right family, according to the crime lab, but not the right person. Investigators progressed down to another brother who lived up in Florence County. An investigator named Tom Shallow has a cabin just down the road from this other brother. And he said, yeah, he comes over for coffee all the time. So one day, the brother came over for coffee. Tom picked the coffee cup up and sent that in as well. And that was the same thing. Same family, wrong brother. That narrowed us down to two brothers. One was deceased, and then we had Ray, who was still alive.
Detectives waste no time tracking down Raymond Van Evenhoven to get a DNA sample from him. Are investigators finally about to corner this elusive killer? Marinette County, Wisconsin, 2019. Detectives are investigating the 1976 murder of 25-year-old David Schuldes and 24-year-old Ellen Matthews, who were shot in McClintock Park. Tragically, Ellen was also sexually assaulted prior to her death. Now, over 40 years later, Parabon Nanolabs, utilizing investigative genetic genealogy, have narrowed the suspect list down to 4 brothers. Detectives run further DNA tests, which rules out 3 brothers, leaving just one, Raymond Van Evenhoven.
Raymond lived in a real remote area on a dead-end road. And I surveilled him for approximately a month, was unable to ever obtain any kind of DNA left behind from him. And he also didn't have a garbage pickup where he was located. You had to take your garbage to the dump. So it was going to be hard to obtain garbage from him. So I asked an individual I used to work with quite often if he could do something for me and try to obtain Raymond Van Evenhoven's DNA.
The current chief deputy of Oconto County and Detective Baldwin developed a plan to conduct a survey with Ray, because Ray kind of lived in the middle of nowhere, and it was hard to actually do surveillance and follow him around and try to get a discarded cigarette butt or something like that.
They knocked on his door and said, hey, we're doing a survey of what you think of policing in this particular township. Gave him the survey. Raymond filled out the survey, put it in the envelope, and licked the envelope to seal it.
Raymond's saliva sample is compared to the DNA left at the crime scene over 40 years ago. It is a match.
We were very excited because we finally had narrowed down on a suspect, and now it was just a matter of putting the rest of the pieces of the puzzle together as best as we could. We developed a plan to go arrest Ray and conduct a search warrant of his residence at the same time, and we went there, and Detective Baldwin and I went in first while the rest of the crew staged to conduct the search warrant. And we met Ray at his house. He invited us inside. We explained, hey, we're from the Marinette County Sheriff's Department and you're under arrest for homicide. Ray just kind of put his head down and turned kind of pale and just went along with us. He didn't argue, he didn't ask what this was about, nothing.
Throughout the investigation, we were under the impression that the suspect was going to be probably in his 60s or so. I never expected that I'd be handcuffing a 82-year-old man for first-degree homicide.
We were hoping we could find the murder weapon or some kind of evidence. Ultimately, we did find a .30 caliber 30-30 rifle in his garage.
They found some shell casings. They sent those off to the crime lab, but those were not a match for the bullet fragments that had been found at the crime scene. But again, this was 40-something years after the homicides. Very likely, he just disposed of any shell casings that was used.
He grew up in the rural Green Bay area, in the Suamico area. He worked as a metal worker his entire life, and we were told from talking to people that he was either working or he was drinking and drunk and angry.
Raymond was 20 years old in 1950 when he was arrested for attacking a couple of teenage girls, a 17-year-old and a 16-year-old. The 17-year-old was walking with friends when he grabbed her and pulled her into a cemetery. She was screaming and her friends came to her aid. He was already married, but he attacked these two young women. He spent 6 months in prison, and that seemed to be that, although nowadays we would put him on a sex offender registry, which would flag him in a way that didn't happen back in the 1950s and 60s.
Raymond is brought in for questioning over the murders of David Schuldes and Ellen Matthees back in 1976.
And then when Detective Baldwin kind of brought out the pictures of the victims, Ray got kind of angry and really defensive. He didn't show any signs of sympathy for the victims or any remorse for what he'd done.
And claimed to have absolutely no knowledge of the crimes of David and Ellen.
Why did he kill these two people?
Why did you do that?
Well, you killed them, right?
You killed them? You meant...
I don't even know.
You might not know them, but you killed them.
Well, I didn't.
Does it ever wake you up at night? Ray, does it ever wake you up at night? This doesn't ever cross your mind, ever? Nope, never? So what you did there doesn't even matter. Don't even care. Remember the blood flying out of her when you shot her, Ray. And then shooting her a second time.
You shoot her? God damn, buddy.
Hey, you shot him. You shot him. You shot him. I did not. I did not. You shot her. Yes, you did. You did. I did. Yeah, you did.
I did not.
You did.
No, I did not.
Well, then how did your semen get in those shorts, Ray?
I don't know how to get there. Put it there.
How would I get your semen?
Well, give me a shit. Go right there.
I'll tell you how you did. You sexually assaulted her.
No.
That's all I got there.
No.
He was charged with 2 counts of what was then called first-degree murder in the Wisconsin statute. The sexual assault charge we could not go forward with because at that time there was only a 6-year statute of limitations, and that had expired.
Now charged for the murders, Raymond Van Evenhoven is put in custody while awaiting trial.
We were concerned that he was going to have some kind of medical event or medical condition, which was going to, take him away from us before we had a chance to put him on trial. He had a stroke, and he ended up being sent to Mendota Mental Health in Madison to be evaluated. Initially, they thought he was probably not competent to stand trial or aid in his defense, and ultimately they decided he was competent.
The trial did not commence until, I believe it was July 19th of 2021. So yes, when you're dealing with someone in their 80s who did have some health issues, certainly that's a concern.
He was wheeled into court, but I thought his demeanor was just cold and didn't care what was going on around him.
Prosecutor Mark Williams gave the opening statement for the state and just basically outlined the evidence that we'd collected from the crime scene, and particularly the shorts, and how that was collected, how those were preserved, and then the DNA from those shorts from, 45 years earlier, and then ultimately a DNA profile was taken from that. He then talked about the different investigative techniques that the Marinette County Sheriff's Office had used and how we ultimately came to the Van Evenhoven family and to Raymond Van Evenhoven himself, and how the evidence is going to show the inarguable link between Mr. Van Evenhoven and the DNA in Ellen Matthees, and how we were going to put that together and show that only Raymond Van Evenhoven could have killed Ellen and David.
Despite the evidence stacked against him, Raymond's defense tries to maintain his innocence.
They tried to separate the sex and the semen from the homicide, to try to say that there wasn't a link between the two. And then they tried to argue that this male that had been seen by our 2 witnesses when they were driving on Parkway Road, they tried to argue that that was some different. Somehow, Raymond had sex with Ellen the day or 2 before she goes up with her fiance on a camping trip, and then some other random male kills them. The jury didn't buy that argument.
The jury deliberates for just 2 hours before reaching a verdict. August the 26th, 2021, 84-year-old Raymond van Evenhoven is sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences.
You find out who it was, they're convicted, they're sentenced to prison, and Ray died within a few months of going to prison.
We knew his age, we knew his health, so I didn't expect him to live very long, but kind of wish that he could have hung on as long as he possibly could have so he could at least suffer in prison for the next few years anyways.
The only thing I can say about somebody like that is he had to be a psychopath. He knew what he was doing when he was going through the woods carrying a rifle. David and Ellen just happened to be in the wrong spot. He saw them there and took his weapon and killed them both, knowing full well what he was planning to do and carrying it out in the manner that he did.
This case is a really good illustration of how powerful investigative genetic genealogy is for revealing secrets of all kinds. Your DNA can absolutely tell the story, no matter how old a case is, no matter when or where it happened.
This young couple now would be grandparents themselves. They would be close to celebrating their golden wedding anniversary. And thanks to this technology and thanks to the preservation of evidence, they now lie in their graves side by side with this crime solved.
These young people were killed 24, 25 years old, never had a chance to live their lives.
A tragedy. He went on with his life for that long, and Ellen and David were taken as mid-20s, a vibrant young couple. Didn't seem fair, didn't seem right. But in the end, justice was done, and we're proud of that.
Sau cách mạng tháng 8 thành công, Việt Nam tuyên bố độc lập, nhưng không phải mọi khó khăn đều đã đi qua. Thực dân Pháp không dễ dàng từ bỏ tham vọng tái chiếm Đông Dương và đất nước lại bước vào một cuộc kháng chiến trường kỳ khác. Trong phần này chúng ta sẽ tìm hiểu về những thách thức mà Việt Nam phải đối mặt sau khi giành được độc lập và vai trò tiếp tục của giai cấp công nhân trong cuộc kháng chiến chống Pháp. Ngay sau khi nước Việt Nam Dân Chủ Cộng Hòa mới được thành lập, tình hình quốc tế và trong nước rất phức tạp. Các cường quốc thế giới sau chiến tranh thế giới thứ hai bắt đầu tái phân chia ảnh hưởng. Thực dân Pháp với tham vọng tái chiếm Đông Dương đã bắt đầu các hoạt động quân sự nhằm tái chiếm lãnh thổ. Trong bối cảnh đó, chính phủ Việt Nam buộc phải ký hiệp định sơ bộ ngày 6 tháng 3 năm 1946 với Pháp để tạm thời duy trì hòa bình, nhưng đây chỉ là bước lùi chiến thuật nhằm chuẩn bị cho một cuộc kháng chiến lâu dài. Cuộc kháng chiến chống Pháp chính thức bắt đầu vào ngày 19 tháng 12 năm 1946 khi Chủ tịch Hồ Chí Minh ra lời kêu gọi toàn quốc kháng chiến. Khẩu hiệu thà hy sinh tất cả chứ nhất định không chịu mất nước, nhất định không chịu làm nô lệ đã vang lên khắp cả nước. Lời kêu gọi toàn dân đứng lên bảo vệ độc lập. Trong cuộc kháng chiến này, giai cấp công nhân, đặc biệt là công nhân các đồn điền cao su tiếp tục đóng một vai trò quan trọng. Tuy các đồn điền cao su phần lớn đã bị chiếm đóng hoặc phá hủy, nhưng những người công nhân không vì thế mà từ bỏ cuộc đấu tranh. Họ tham gia vào các đội quân du kích tổ chức phá hoại các cơ sở sản xuất của Pháp, cắt đứt các tuyến đường tiếp tế của quân đội thực dân. Nhiều công nhân đã trở thành những chiến sĩ cách mạng, tham gia các đội vũ trang và trực tiếp cầm súng chiến đấu. Ở một số vùng họ tổ chức các đội quân tự vệ bảo vệ quê hương, cơ sở sản xuất và tiếp tục đấu tranh dưới mọi hình thức. Những người công nhân này hiểu rằng cuộc chiến giành độc lập không chỉ diễn ra ngay trong chiến trường mà còn trong mọi ngõ ngách của đời sống hàng ngày. Không chỉ góp sức trong chiến đấu, giai cấp công nhân còn tham gia tích cực vào các hoạt động kinh tế để duy trì và phát triển đất nước trong hoàn cảnh chiến tranh. Họ lao động sản xuất trong điều kiện khắc nghiệt, thiếu thốn nhưng vẫn quyết tâm cung cấp đủ lương thực, thực phẩm, vũ khí cho mặt trận. Cuộc kháng chiến chống Pháp kéo dài 9 năm với đỉnh cao là chiến dịch Điện Biên Phủ vào năm 1954. Trong chiến dịch này, quân và dân Việt Nam đã giành chiến thắng vang dội trước quân đội Pháp, làm sụp đổ hoàn toàn kế hoạch tái chiếm Đông Dương của thực dân. Chiến thắng Điện Biên Phủ không chỉ là kết quả của sự lãnh đạo tài tình của Đảng Cộng sản và Chủ tịch Hồ Chí Minh, mà còn là sự hy sinh to lớn của hàng triệu người dân Việt Nam, trong đó có những người công nhân đồn điền cao su. Họ đã đóng góp bằng mồ hôi, máu và cả mạng sống của mình để làm nên chiến thắng này. Hiệp định Geneva được ký kết vào vòng 5 tháng 7 năm 1954 đã chính thức chấm dứt chiến tranh tại Đông Dương. Theo hiệp định này, Việt Nam tạm thời bị chia cắt làm hai miền, miền Bắc do chính phủ Việt Nam Dân Chủ Cộng hòa lãnh đạo, miền Nam do chính quyền quốc gia Việt Nam thân Pháp cai quản, chuẩn bị cho cuộc tổng tuyển cử thống nhất đất nước vào năm 1956. Cuộc kháng chiến chống Pháp kéo dài 9 năm với đỉnh cao là chiến dịch Điện Biên Phủ vào năm 1954. Trong chiến dịch này, quân và dân Việt Nam đã giành được chiến thắng vang dội trước thực dân Pháp, làm sụp đổ hoàn toàn kế hoạch tái chiếm Đông Dương của thực dân. Chiến thắng Điện Biên Phủ không chỉ là kết quả của sự lãnh đạo tài tình của Đảng Cộng sản và Chủ tịch Hồ Chí Minh, mà còn là sự hy sinh to lớn của hàng triệu người dân Việt Nam, trong đó có những người công nhân đồn điền cao su. Họ đã đóng góp bằng mồ hôi, máu và cả mạng sống của mình. Hiệp định Geneva được ký kết vào tháng 7 năm 1954 đã chính thức chấm dứt chiến tranh tại Đông Dương. Theo hiệp định này, Việt Nam tạm thời chia cắt làm hai miền Bắc do chính phủ Việt Nam Dân Chủ Cộng hòa lãnh đạo và miền Nam do chính quyền quốc gia Việt Nam thân Pháp lãnh đạo, chuẩn bị cho cuộc tổng tuyển cử thống nhất đất nước vào năm 1956. Sau khi miền Bắc được hoàn toàn giải phóng, đất nước chưa hoàn toàn độc lập và thống nhất, miền Nam vẫn nằm dưới sự kiểm soát của các thế lực phản động và thực dân mới. Trong bối cảnh đó, nhiệm vụ của giai cấp công nhân và nhân dân miền Bắc là xây dựng xã hội, củng cố lực lượng để tiếp tục đấu tranh giải phóng miền Nam. Những công nhân từng làm việc tại các đồn điền cao su nay trở thành những người tiên phong trong công cuộc tái thiết và phát triển kinh tế miền Bắc. Họ tham gia vào các công trình xây dựng, phát triển các khu công nghiệp và tiếp tục truyền bá tinh thần cách mạng đến thế hệ trẻ. Những bài học từ cuộc đấu tranh chống thực dân Pháp đã trở thành kinh nghiệm quý báu để họ đối mặt với những thách thức trong công cuộc xây dựng đất nước. Cuộc hành trình của giai cấp công nhân Việt Nam từ những ngày đầu bóc lột tàn bạo trong các đồn điền cao su đến khi trở thành những chiến sĩ cách mạng kiên cường đã chứng minh hùng hồn cho sức mạnh của tinh thần đoàn kết và ý chí đấu tranh của nhân dân. Chiến thắng Điện Biên Phủ và Hiệp định Geneva đã mở ra một chương mới trong lịch sử Việt Nam, nhưng cũng đặt ra nhiều thách thức cho đất nước. Trong những năm tháng sau này, giai cấp công nhân tiếp tục đóng vai trò quan trọng trong cuộc đấu tranh giải phóng miền Nam và thống nhất đất nước. Những câu chuyện về họ, về những hy sinh và công hiến của họ sẽ tiếp tục được viết tiếp trong phần sau của cuộc hành trình lịch sử này. Hãy cùng chúng tôi tiếp tục khám phá trang sử hào hùng ấy trong phần tiếp theo khi chúng ta bước vào giai đoạn kháng chiến chống Mỹ và thống nhất đất nước.
I'm a rapist. Like the others in this courtroom, they knew everything.
They treated me like a rag doll, like a garbage bag.
The abuse went on for years, in secret, a husband drugging his wife.
He would put her into a coma state for around 7 hours each time he did this.
All the time, Dominique Pellicot was filming, sometimes with a fixed camera, sometimes with his phone, but every time he was filming.
strangers invited to act out their darkest urges.
The video evidence would show a smiling man, looking at the camera, sometimes doing a thumbs up, extremely confident of what he was doing.
I think the scale of it is what shocked a lot of people, because there are at least 50 men who were indicted.
Is there not within you any shred of feeling of responsibility for what you did? J'ai ma part de responsabilité.
I have my share of responsibility.
But then the wife stands defiant, casting off her shame, and challenging us all to ask hard questions about how such horrors could happen and how to stop the next Dominique Pellico.
Mazan is in many ways a very picturesque, classic village in Provence. It's in the middle of a wine-growing region, fruit-growing region.
Mazan is a very small village, a very quiet area with a lot of retired people. It's very sunny, and a lot of people come here because there are beautiful landscapes.
You have beautiful stone houses with pastel shutters. It's a vibrant village. It's a village with life. It has a school, it has a pharmacy, it has a hairdressers, a bakers. People know each other there, and then you also have couples who retire there from Paris, which was the case of the Pellicos. They lived on the edge of the village in a little house with a small pool.
They moved in Mazan in 2011. They had a lot of friends. They are very social, they know their neighbors very well, and they have a lot of friends there.
The story of Dominique Pellico's unmasking begins at this supermarket in the nearby town of Carpentras. A curtain is about to be lifted here, a first glimpse into a world of almost unthinkable depravity.
Dominique Pellico was in a supermarket, and he took with him a little camera on his phone, and he was trying to take some pictures under the clothes of some woman.
Il est en train de filmer sous votre robe. Si, vous portez plainte. Il est en train de filmer sous votre robe le téléphone comme ça à l'instant. Vous avez de la chance, je vous jure, c'est ma mère, je vous arrache la tête.
Often, nothing is done about this type of crime, but in this particular case, there was a very determined security guard in the supermarket.
Madame, je compte sur vous, vous portez plainte. Il était en train de filmer sous votre robe. Allez, police, tu me les appelles maintenant.
He stopped this man, and he also convinced the 3 women who had been targeted to complain to the police.
Vous êtes un gros dégueulasse, vous, en fait. Ouais, vous êtes un gros dégueulasse.
Dominique Pellico is arrested and released on bail, but crucially, the local police decide to keep investigating. Back home with Giselle, his wife of 47 years, Dominique tries to shrug it off as a moment of madness.
She was absolutely shocked when she heard about that, and she told her husband, well, I will support you, but you need to present, to apologize to these women, and you need to receive counseling, therapy, and if you do that, I will stand by your side.
It was at the end of the week, a Friday, I still remember it. This was happening in my city, so I was asked to examine this gentleman. I said that, in my opinion, there was something that did not fit. There was an inconsistency between the man, presented as a kind grandfather, and the acts that he had committed.
The psychiatrist is onto something. The police now begin to examine Pellico's phone and computer, and stumble upon thousands of explicit videos and photos from the couple's bedroom. The full horror of the abuse Giselle suffered is about to be revealed.
The policeman asked them to come to see them. She's sitting down in the police station, and the policeman tells her, well, I'm gonna say to you some very difficult things, be ready. And he shows her a photography of her naked, and he asks her, is it you? Is that you on the photography? She says, yes, it's me. And he shows her another photography where she is naked, but she's being raped. And he tells her, well, we have a lot of photographies like this where you are raped by other men, and we think that your husband was asking these men to come and to rape you.
It was hard to recognize myself. The officer showed me a second photo, and a third. I asked him to stop. It was unbearable. I was lifeless, in my bed, and a man was raping me. My world fell apart. I'm speaking now not for myself, but for all the women who are drugged and abused.
At this moment, her husband is also heard by other policemen in another room. So it's going to be the last time she will see him until the trial. So for 4 years, she will not see him again.
We know that Dominique Pellicot continued to drug and rape Giselle Pellicot until the very last moment he was finally arrested. So even while he knew that police were searching his home and looking at his digital records.
Before the arrest, the Pellicots seemed a happy, close-knit family. Giselle suspected nothing.
We've been together for 50 years. I've been a happy woman, fulfilled, with 3 children and 7 grandchildren. He was a caring father who listened, a kind man whom I trusted completely. We shared our laughter and our sorrows. How many times have I told him how lucky I am to have him by my side?
On retirement, the couple moved to Mazan from the Paris area. Giselle had worked in admin for the electricity company EDF. Dominique had been an electrician.
It's a close family. Dominique and Giselle Pellicot have 3 children, a daughter, Caroline, and 2 sons, David and Florian. And yeah, they had a very, very good relationship.
But in secret, Dominique is now exploring a world of online depravity, using one particular website to share his violent sexual impulses.
Coco was a website which of course has now been shut down, which was a website where you could meet people, exchange imagery, lots of which was illegal, sell drugs. It had several chat room facilities. The accused men who were using it to seek sexual encounters or sexual imagery of certain descriptions.
For nearly a decade, perhaps far longer, he uses Coco to invite dozens of men to the family home, to the couple's bedroom.
When he was connecting on his website, he was using a term, so à son insu, without her knowledge.
This was a chat room which Dominique Pellicot used a lot.
This website is able to have a geographic area, so it's easier when you want to have a meeting with these people.
One of them said described it as almost like a supermarket. It was like a menu. You would go on and you would decide what you wanted.
He was sending them some picture of his wife naked. Of course, she wasn't aware that he was taking these pictures.
Giselle knows nothing of this. That's because she's being drugged by her husband.
According to what he said, he was telling them the truth, that she would be drugged and that she would be sleeping.
He said he would put her into a coma state for around 7 hours each time he did this, which would allow him, again very methodically, to undress her from her pajamas, dress her in various items that he had chosen, invite men to rape her himself, take photos of her, change her back into her pajamas, having cleaned her in, again, a very sort of medical manner. He said that he did this to her 2 to 3 times a week, which is more than the videos show. The question is, how did he get the expertise? How did he get the dosing to this point? He says that he simply experimented with the drugs and he would crush them into her food. She would often go to bed and read, and he would come in with a little tray and a bowl of raspberry ice cream, which is her favourite flavour ice cream. And she thought, well, this is such a lovely guy, he's such a love.
Not for a single second did I doubt this man. I would have given him both my hands to cut off.
Over the years, the drugs take a heavy toll on her health. Giselle becomes confused, even fearful she's dying.
I'm convinced I've got Alzheimer's. Dominique takes me to see a neurologist who reassures me that it's not that disease. And Dominique also reassures me. My brother-in-law, a doctor, says I need a scan, and Dominique comes with me. I think I'm going crazy because I'm so absent-minded, and my friends notice it too.
And all this time, the rapes continue, with strict rules established for the men who come at night.
All the time it was the same. It was quite a ritual. Dominique Pellicot was asking the men to come to his house, to park not exactly in front of the house, but in a more quiet area. They were coming, they were taking off their shoes, they were washing their hands, because they didn't want to wake Giselle Pellicot up. So the hands had to be quite warm. They just took their clothes off and they were going to the room to rape her.
So who are these men? They've all connected on the same website, a site that links people living close to each other, so most are from Mazan or nearby. 3/4 of the men have children. Half are in steady relationships. Almost half have criminal records, but they range in age from 27 to 74 and have a wide variety of jobs. They are a mixed bag and, you could say, a cross-section of French society.
It is possibly one of the most shocking aspects of this case, how easily he found 50, maybe 100 men in the neighboring area willing to participate in these scenarios. It's harrowing to think about.
Because it suggests that it's everywhere.
Yes, well, I think it's something that is difficult to think about and we don't want to think about it, but yes, I'm certain that there are other Dominique Pellicots and other men who do that because, look how easy it was.
One of the men, a nurse, agrees to talk to us anonymously about why he accepted Dominique Pellicot's invitation. He'll later be found guilty of rape.
Elle m'a dit que c'était pour le besoin du couple.
He told me that it was for the couple's needs, to spice up their evening together. They visualize this kind of film, it excites them.
Il me demande de me déshabiller.
He asks me to undress, and he undresses. And there I am, naked. He tells me that he is going to tell his wife to get ready.
Il disparaît.
He disappears. It's not even a minute before he comes back. At that moment, I am terrified. I am paralyzed. My brain is going in all directions.
Why didn't you leave at that point? Pourquoi vous n'avez pas tourné parti à ce moment-là?
C'est ça la question.
That's the question. Why? Because I was paralyzed. I was terrified. I was stunned. I would even say I was fascinated by what was happening.
Is there not within you any shred of feeling of responsibility for what you did?
J'ai ma part de responsabilité.
I have my share of responsibility. In this case, there isn't one responsibility. There aren't two responsibilities. There aren't three. There are a multitude of responsibilities that led to Mrs. Pellicot being traumatized and mistreated for years.
Des années.
4 years after Dominique Pellicot's arrest, the trial begins. Of the many dozens of men who came to the couple's house, prosecutors have charged 50. The trial is a shock, a revelation for France.
At first, when Gisèle Pelicot arrived in September, she was very discreet, she was a bit shy, she was very stressed.
But it's at this point that Gisèle makes an extraordinary decision to waive her right to privacy. Instead, she wants an open trial, and it seems the world is now watching.
She had these sunglasses that she used to hide her eyes, to be in this room knowing that there would be all eyes on her.
As each week went by, she presented herself as stronger and stronger and stronger as the case went on.
In court, Dominique declares that he is guilty, but no more and no less than all the other men on trial.
I'm a rapist, like the others in this courtroom. They knew everything. They cannot say the contrary. You're not born a pervert, you become one.
But almost all the accused plead not guilty, saying they were confused, intimidated, mistaken.
For many of them, they were involved in a libertine project with the couple. They thought it was a couple's arrangement, only to discover that it was actually a sinister and criminal scheme devised by the husband.
I think it's bullshit. If you're in a situation where you're in an intimate contact with somebody and you're not sure they want to be involved in whatever's happening, you stop.
Less than half of them admitted raping. Even some of the men said, well, my brain switched itself off, my brain was cut off from the rest of my body, and I simply didn't know what I was doing. Some of them said that they were victims, that they were collateral victims of Dominique Pellicot because he had told them what to do and they were simply following instructions. And one of them, who was a former record shop worker in Avignon, said, I was curious. Yes, I did rape. He also discussed with Dominique Pellicot drugging one of his own girlfriends with a view to her being raped.
For those pleading not guilty, there is one huge obstacle, something rare in any rape trial.
One of the particularities of this trial is that everything was filmed and meticulously recorded by Dominique Pellicot.
It can be short video, long videos. It's always very clear. You see everything. The light is strong and it's absolutely awful.
On many of the videos, it's possible to listen to Mrs. Pellicot snoring sometime, and it's even more disturbing. It's possible to listen to her choking when some of the men are abusing her.
So it's absolutely obvious that she is sleeping, and when the defendants, a lot of them pretend that they didn't understand, that she was completely unconscious, that she was sleeping. And with this video, you understand that they are lying.
When we were looking at the dates, one day she said, but that was my birthday evening, or the 31st of December, or Valentine's Day, or to discover that it had happened in her daughter's beach house, so in her daughter's bed in the beach house. So the circumstances were extremely disturbing.
Sometimes you would have an accused man who said, no, I didn't do anything. I don't even remember going to the bedroom, or I did go into the bedroom, but perhaps I'd been drugged. And then the video evidence would show a smiling man looking at the camera, sometimes doing a thumbs up, extremely confident of what he was doing. There was a turning point just before the trial when she sat down with her lawyers and looked at the video evidence and was extremely angry. There was a moment of indignation, her lawyers said. And she thought, well, I'm not hiding anymore. This needs to be seen. People need to see what's happened to me.
I realized I had nothing to be ashamed of. I had nothing to be ashamed of. I've been raped 100 times, and it was difficult to take the decision to broadcast these videos, but it also allowed us to find out the truth. The shame is not ours to have, it's theirs.
It was difficult for anybody in court to see those things, but everybody knew that it was about bearing witness.
The videos and the trial establish Giselle as a society-shaking, transformative figure, a victim refusing to feel shame.
I'm not sure she had prepared for the absolute staggering amount of support she had from all across the world.
I just hope that her case will help justice to change laws.
She understood that she wasn't the defendant here, and that she could just walk in that courtroom and be proud of her.
She do it to give strength to all the women who don't have the courage to go on trial, to fight.
J'ai été profondément touchée.
I was deeply touched by this outpouring of support, which gives me a sense of responsibility. Thanks to all of you, I have the strength to fight this battle to the end. A battle that I dedicate to the women and men around the world who are victims of sexual violence. To all these victims, I want to say today, look around you, you're not alone.
I would thank her for speaking up for victims of sexual violence, because there's so many of us. I don't doubt that every woman has been through something, you know. And in that way, she represents all the women in the world.
The case is an inspiration, a call to action. But inevitably, there are voices of dissent, skeptics.
What comes out often around the town is that there haven't been any deaths. I would say that what would have been bad would have been if he had killed his wife. But in this case, it didn't happen.
I feel like you're trying to diminish what happened.
Yes, I'm diminishing it, because I think it could have been much worse. When kids are involved or women killed, then that is very serious, because you can't go back. In this case, the woman is going to have to rebuild herself, that's for sure. That's very hard for her and her family, but there haven't been any deaths.
I think it's a perfect proof that a lot of political men, especially, absolutely doesn't realize the problem. The problem is huge. The problem should be taken very seriously, and it's not.
As the trial moves towards a conclusion, a troubling question remains. Was it only Giselle who suffered?
On the hard drive, there were a couple of images and a couple of photo montages of Dominique Pellicot's daughter Caroline, an adult, in a sleeping position in underwear on a bed. When she saw them, she said, "That's not my underwear." She asked her father repeatedly through the trial, and these were some of the most emotional moments in the trial, "Tell me what you did to me. I know that you drugged me and abused me." And he consistently said, "I didn't do anything to you." And at one point, well, at 2 points actually, she shouted at him, "You're lying."
There's another question. When did Dominique Pellicot first begin to rape? French investigators are now linking him to two much older crimes. DNA evidence confirms one attempted rape, which Pellicot now admits, but he denies another rape when a woman was strangled to death.
We are looking at two cases that are old cases, so cases that have never been solved. The first one I took care of was the case of Sophie Narm, who was raped and strangled in 1991. The second one is an attempted rape in the Paris region in 1999. Both worked in estate agents on the ground floor. In both cases, we have the use of a specific product called ether. Both were tied up and violently assaulted. We really have a lot of similarities.
Those cold cases have been reopened and there's an investigation ongoing. What is clear is there was a pattern of offending over decades, and potentially a few moments to have stopped this person at earlier points.
All this reinforces the image of a deeply manipulative man, living a double life, unable to feel empathy.
He's very arrogant and very confident. It can be surprising. He could fear the people in the room. He could fear his wife, his daughter, who hates him, but he doesn't. He doesn't. He behaves and he just stays there and look at everybody.
What was striking about my examination was that, on one hand, I had the story of a Mr. Pellicot, father of three, grandfather, came to retire in the south of France, appreciated by his neighbors, and on the other hand, this individual who had succeeded over the years in setting up a perverted scenario. It's a mechanism that is well known called splitting. Splitting is a psychological mechanism where you compartmentalize your mind almost like a hard drive.
He was described as someone who was a very clever manipulator, who had a lack of empathy, a lack of introspection, an inability to imagine himself in someone else's shoes.
As the trial ends, there's an outpouring of support for Giselle. The guilty verdicts for all the men and a maximum 20-year sentence for Dominique Pellicot, no surprise. But this case stopped being about the rapists a long time ago. Instead, it's become the story of one woman who's made us all think harder about consent, about drugging, about courage.
Je souhaite exprimer ma gratitude la plus profonde.
I want to express my deepest gratitude to all the people who have supported me throughout this ordeal. I was overwhelmed by your support, and I drew from it the strength to come back every day to face these long days of hearings. I wanted to open the doors of this trial last September so that society could see what was happening. I have never regretted this decision. I have confidence now in our capacity, collectively, to find a better future in which men and women alike can live harmoniously together with respect and mutual understanding. Thank you.
Je vous remercie.
When the tide rises, the sisters and sea, it's the unique heart. You are like a bright red rose, always fragrant and seductive. I see you coming back in my sleep. The nostalgia is overflowing, it cannot be quenched. The nostalgia is gentle and very gentle. A nostalgia is gentle and very gentle. The nostalgia is gentle and very gentle. A nostalgia is gentle.
wasn't my intention to kill her, but I beat her up too much.
Where are you?
I'm left the property, I'm gonna come back.
The call handler tries to establish where he is, but the man refuses to say. He wanted them to go round to his house in Woking.
Police! Don't leave the door open. Police, hello, anyone in?
And officers managed to secure entry to the property.
Police, hello?
Very clean and tidy property, very sparse in terms of its decoration.
Police, hello?
And officers made their way as they were directed to one of the bedrooms where they found Sarah's body. Sarah was lying on the bed. She was very peaceful in how she looked, and officers found a note that was just next to Sarah's body.
Love you, Sarah. Whoever see this note, it's me, Urfan Sharif, who killed my daughter by beating. I'm running away because I'm scared, but I promise that I will hand over myself and take punishment.
When I think of Sarah, my immediate image of her is her smile. She had the cutest, biggest smile with her little cheeks. And that is the first thing that pops into my head. Sarah was a very caring, very confident little girl. What we remember is she was an absolute chatterbox. And she wanted to just talk to absolutely everybody and anyone. She loved singing and dancing. One of the memories that will always stay with me is
and by that time he had a new partner, Binish Batul, who basically became Sarah's stepmother.
Binish Batul was Sarah's stepmother. She was a stay-at-home mum. She was very busy. She was looking after 6 children, so had a very busy life. Sarah's uncle, Faisal Malik, moved over from Pakistan to the UK and moved into this small flat. And by that time, you had 3 adults and 6 children crammed into this really small space.
What neighbours heard was a household where there was a lot of disturbance. There was banging, sounds of crashing, could be smacking. They hear a lot of swearing at the children.
The messaging that we had between Baynash and her sisters was very important because that gave us a real oversight, I would say, of what was going on in that house at that time.
Irfan is going crazy, beating Sarah up. I'm kind of having a panic attack. I have Russia and I'm literally dying. What the hell shall I do?
Why? What did she do?
He's literally going to break her arm or leg. I have no idea what to do. She's covered in bruises, literally beaten black.
And where's Irfan?
Sitting on his fat bum and playing Ludo.
The school is starting to see bruising on Sarah. By now she's wearing a hijab. It may be that she's starting to wear a hijab to hide the other signs of bruising. And the school are concerned enough about these bruises that they see that they contact Surrey County Council. They listen to the various accounts from the parents, from Sarah, as to how it is that she's received these bruises. And after 6 days, Surrey County Council say to the school that the school should take no further action and should monitor Sarah.
Soon after Sarah turned up to school with a mark on her cheek, her stepmother, Binish Batul, went to the school and she was really defensive and said it was caused by a pen. There was an entry on the Child Protection computer system which had noted that Binish Batul had used really foul language towards the children. Then the Easter holiday came, and on the first day that Sarah was meant to return, the school, the head teacher, got an email from Sarah's father saying that he was going to pull Sarah out of school to homeschool her.
In April, the family move house. They move out of their very small two-bedroom flat into a bigger semi-detached house in Woking.
They're a large family, 6 children. A bit of a surprise because they're quite small houses, 3 bedrooms, but they looked so happy, and the younger children cartwheeled all the way down the back garden. It's a nice garden with a big lawn. And we just thought it was going to be quite a happy family if they decided to move in. That was my first impression.
Tonight is a breakthrough on the horizon in one of the country's most high-profile unsolved mysteries.
JonBenét Ramsey, the name we all know, the case that shook America that Christmas nearly 30 years ago. Could there finally be a major turn in the case? 2020 begins right now.
I just kept saying, no, no. Ask God to raise her.
JonBenét Ramsey, the story you can't forget, the case you think you know.
With all that attention, all that scrutiny, why hasn't this crime been solved?
One simple reason: the police have refused help that was offered, and it could have helped.
But now is the new documentary series changing the picture.
Go back to the damn drawing board.
So early on, they locked into this crazy idea that the parents were responsible. They get tunnel vision.
With new DNA technology, is a solution closer than ever.
We think the crime can be solved.
Inspiring John Ramsey.
Tonight, the new John Ramsey interview.
You dwell on your loss, and you just can't do that.
And what you've never seen before. From the iconic Barbara Walters sit-down.
This was a monster that killed our daughter.
And the police think that it's you.
Now the detective who defied the police.
They knew at the time that there was DNA and that it was not from Ramsey's DNA.
And he just said, I have a name, I want you to write it down. And I did, and he said, that's where you start. All but one person on that list is innocent.
Then you got your killer.
She was a beautiful child of God. We knew she was special. We knew she was going to make a difference. We certainly didn't expect it to be this way. And yet, here's a child who is known literally around the world. So she did become special.
She is the special little girl, forever 6 years old. While JonBenét Ramsey remains frozen in time, her father has endured nearly 3 decades without justice, without answers, and without his daughter. I sat down for a new interview with the now 81-year-old John Ramsey.
Hello, sir. Byron Fitz. Byron John Ramsey.
I had JonBenét bless my life for 6 years, and she really was a blessing. Just an amazing little kid.
She was daddy's girl.
She was daddy's girl, big time.
Do you allow yourself to think, what if this hadn't happened?
I don't. I did run into one of her little friends on the street who is now, 30 and an adult. And that was a little bit of a jolt to think, wow, could have been JonBenét. She's still my little girl. That's the picture I have in my head when I think of her.
Ramsey has renewed hope that his daughter's killer can finally be found, confident that advances in DNA technology are the key to solving the mystery.
There's been a number of old cold cases solved using this genealogy research.
There was no more important story in the country than the disappearance and the death of your daughter.
Police have still not named a suspect.
It's now been 12 days since JonBenét Ramsey was murdered.
Officers have spent more than 3,000 hours processing evidence and interviewing more than 90 people. With all that attention, all that scrutiny, why hasn't this crime been solved?
One simple reason: the police have refused help that was offered. They had no experience. They didn't have a homicide department.
That police response and its aftermath is the focus of a new Netflix docuseries, Cold Case: Who Killed JonBenét Ramsey?
Someone killed this 6-year-old child.
You have a small-town police force that gets a crime that they're not used to.
Is it fair to question the Boulder Police Department's experience, ability to investigate a homicide?
I don't think so. Just because you have one homicide in a year, I think is actually a sign of remarkable strength in a community.
This was the first murder in Boulder that year, and it was December 26. So they don't have a lot of murders, particularly where a little girl is tortured to death.
John Ramsey worked with award-winning documentarian Joe Berlinger, who says he wanted to shed new light on what he calls one of the most brutalized families in American history.
Obviously, he wasn't legally wrongfully convicted, but he was wrongfully convicted, and his wife, Patsy, the family were wrongfully convicted in the court of public opinion.
You still feel like it's a cloud over your family name?
Yeah.
Because I guess because there are still people in the country who still believe
absolutely
that your wife were responsible.
No doubt. And we could have the killer confessed, arrested, in prison, and there'd still be 5 to 10% of the population that, yeah, it was the father, or yeah, it was the mother.
The hit docuseries has sparked a new generation of interest on social media.
Okay, one of my girlfriends and I have a new JonBenét theory, and I want to float it. I just finished the JonBenét Ramsey new documentary on Netflix, and holy I need to know what happened to JonBenét Ramsey.
With the wave of renewed scrutiny, the Boulder Police Department issued a video statement last month.
So much of how law enforcement works has changed in the last 30 years. There are a number of things that people have pointed to throughout the years that could have been done better, and we acknowledge that is true. However, it is important to emphasize that while we cannot go back to that horrible day in 1996, our goal is to find JonBenét Ramsey's killer.
That horrible day in 1996 began at Christmas time in the storybook neighborhood where the Ramsey family lived in Boulder, Colorado.
There's a saying here in Colorado that Boulder is 30 square miles of fantasy surrounded by reality.
It's very wealthy, it's well-to-do.
John and Patsy Ramsey lived in a 6,700 square feet Tudor there on 15th Street.
John Ramsey was the CEO of a computer services company. He'd suffered tragedy before when his 22-year-old daughter, Beth, died in a car accident. In 1980, he married his new wife, Patsy.
By all accounts, they were a happy couple. Patsy was a high society woman.
I'm a daughter. I'm a sister. I'm a friend. I'm a wife and a mother. John used to tell people that I invested in futures the futures of my children. That's how I usually answer my occupation.
John and Patsy Ramsey had 2 children together. Their firstborn was Burke, 9 years old, and JonBenét, 6.5, in kindergarten.
My name is John Andrew Ramsey, JonBenét's half-brother. JonBenét was just an energetic and fun kid.
Patsy Ramsey was a former beauty queen, Miss West Virginia. By the time JonBenét was 4 years old, she was in the pageant system herself.
I really believe that if we hadn't seen the beauty pageant photos of JonBenét Ramsey, it might have just gone into the ether as another child murder. This one captivated us because we saw the beauty pageant pictures.
Hello, I'm Patsy Ramsey. This is JonBenét. She's 4, Burke is 7.
Christmas was Patsy's favorite time, and she really went all out. She had a Christmas tree for every room, and every tree had a theme. The windows were done with garland, the staircases had garland, there were red ribbons everywhere.
And from all of us at our house to everyone at your house, Merry Christmas and the happiest of New Year's.
There was plenty to celebrate that Christmas of 1996. Patsy had been battling ovarian cancer and was finally in remission. On Christmas morning, the family opened presents in their home.
They were going to a friend's house for dinner that night.
We were going to leave early the next morning for a trip to our summer cottage in Michigan. So we came home, set the alarm, and went to sleep.
This is your first extended interview.
In 2000, Barbara Walters spoke to the couple about that terrible day.
You get up, you're dressed. What happens?
I went down our steps from our bedroom to the second floor. Then I started walking down the spiral staircase. And as I came to the bottom of the stairs, there were 3 pages neatly laid across one of the runs of the stairway.
She picked up the note and she started to read it.
I just remember when I read, "We have your daughter," it just, this overwhelming fear.
And then?
And then I just screamed for John, screamed.
Take me back to that day.
I was shaving or getting dressed and I heard Patsy scream, and we called the police immediately.
We have a kidnapping. Hurry, please. Explain to me what's going on. What's your name? Are you Patsy Ramsey? I'm the mother. Oh my God.
I was the call taker that night shift when the call came in.
Police, what's going on 15th Street? What's going on there, ma'am? We have a kidnapping. Hurry, please. Explain to me what's going on, okay? There's a note left and our daughter's gone. There's a ransom note here. It's a ransom note? Oh my God! Please.
She's hysterical. She says there's a kidnapping.
Please.
I'm sending an officer over, okay?
Please.
Do you know how long she's been gone?
No, I don't. Please, we just got out and she's not here. Oh my God, please.
The note said, if you do anything, if police come, if FBI come, your daughter will die. You called 911.
Yes, I did. I had to do something. I had to take action.
And I mean, all this happened in a matter of moments.
Patsy Ramsey called 911 at 5:52 a.m., and the first officer from the Boulder Police Department arrives 3 minutes later at 5:55.
We called friends for help at that point. Your daughter is gone.
Desperate.
She's in the hands of a madman.
My phone rang. Pam, they've got her. What do you mean they've got her? They've kidnapped JonBenét. She's gone.
What was the atmosphere like as you sat and waited?
Well, it was awful. First of all, we didn't know whether the kidnapper was going to call that day because the note said, "I will call you tomorrow. Get plenty of rest." I was deathly afraid that tomorrow was in fact the 27th.
You lose all perception of time, of place. You've just been dealt a horrible, crushing blow.
At 6 o'clock on the morning of December 26th, the police came in and did a cursory search of the residence. It was a lavish home with about 18 rooms.
The police did a terrible, terrible job securing that scene. And if you don't secure the scene, you don't get good evidence.
The mistakes they made were outrageous, they were mystifying, they were mistake after mistake after mistake.
People were streaming through that house. They were in the kitchen, they were in the living room. There were some friends of Patsy's that were helping her wipe up the kitchen. There could have been fingerprints there.
You had friends that were Windexing the sink and washing dishes. And
People were making toast in the kitchen. And yes, a kidnapping is a crime scene, but we were so focused on getting JonBenét back. That was the task.
What we have learned is that everyone should have been sequestered into an area so that people weren't roaming around the house.
And that was a mistake on my part. The reason I didn't is because these people were the Ramsey's support system. There was no information at all to indicate the family was involved at that point.
It was a crime scene, and it was getting contaminated. The note was being passed around and reviewed by all of their friends.
Of all of the evidence left behind, that ransom note is the most baffling. Number one, it is too damn long. A ransom note is not that long. A ransom note says, I have your child, I want $1 million, I'll call you later.
The note was 3 pages and written in longhand.
That ransom note was the War and Peace of ransom notes.
It begins, Mr. Ramsey, listen carefully.
You will withdraw $118,000 from your account. $100,000 will be in $100 bills, and the remaining $18,000 in $20 bills.
You think about this number and how is it relevant? And it's relevant because John Ramsey got a bonus from his company for $118,000. How many people knew that? I'm going to guess not a lot of people.
This footage of Barbara Walters' interview with the Ramseys in 2000 has never aired until now.
the ransom note asked for an odd figure, $118,000. That was a bonus that you had received.
Well, that was one of the theories that I came up with, that it was close to the net amount I'd received that year as a bonus. 118 means something to the killer. We know that. We believe that. Whether it's tied to my bonus or something only the killer knows, we don't know.
Did you know that your husband got this kind of a bonus?
Not at the time, no.
Lou Smith, a detective who would later be brought into the case to re-examine the evidence, noticed something else unusual about the ransom note. Some of the phrases appear to mimic lines in movies about kidnappings. Lou Smith recorded his observations about the case.
John? The movie Ransom was playing in Boulder.
I have your son.
Oh, Jesus.
I want $2 million.
Oh, God.
In that particular movie, a fat cat industrialist, his son was kidnapped. There's a lot of the same verbiage in this note as was in even the note that was written in that particular movie.
If we catch you talking to a stray dog, she dies.
A kidnapper says a similar line to Clint Eastwood in the movie Dirty Harry.
If you talk to anyone, I don't care if it's a Pekingese pissing against a lamppost, the girl dies.
You and your family are under constant scrutiny, as well as the authorities. Don't try to grow a brain, John. That's a line used by a terrorist in the movie Speed.
Do not attempt to grow a brain. Our guy's a real watcher of that particular type of movies.
The ransom note was a vital piece of evidence. Police need to figure out who wrote it and when.
On the morning of December 26, the minutes ticked by as the Ramseys waited to hear from the kidnapper.
It was awful.
The kidnappers had written that they would telephone you by 10 a.m.
All I prayed for was that he would call.
But it would be a discovery inside the house that would change everything. The ransom note that Patsy Ramsey says she found indicated there would be a call between 8 and 10 a.m.
The police had prepped me on how to respond in a phone call, and it's very important that you hear JonBenét's voice.
Police officers were leaving between 9:30 and 9:45 before that time period of the phone call had even expired. One lone detective was left on the scene.
Detective Linda Arndt is left behind in the house with John and Patsy Ramsey.
Arndt didn't have extensive homicide experience managing a kidnapping and what was about to unfold. This was likely pretty overwhelming for one lone police officer.
I was praying. Linda Arndt had said to me, we're hopeful that the kidnappers will just drop JonBené off someplace. And I kept looking out the window, clutching this cross and just imagining that she was going to come running down the street.
They're waiting for a telephone call from the kidnapper. What's going to happen next?
My former ABC News colleague, Elizabeth Vargas, did one of the first extensive interviews with Detective Linda Arndt.
10 o'clock comes and goes, and there's no acknowledgement that the deadline imposed by the author of the ransom note has come and gone.
Nobody said it's 10 o'clock and the kidnappers haven't called?
Nobody said that.
According to Arndt, neither John nor Patsy Ramsey seemed to mark it or freak out about it. She says later she found it curious that John Ramsey checked his mail in the kitchen in the middle of the crisis.
How are you supposed to act when you think?
Oh, I don't know for sure, but I really thought I could get JonBené back if I kept my wits about me. You know, there was a pile of envelopes that had come through our front door slot. I was looking for another communication for the kidnapper. She should have been doing that.
Linda Arndt tells the restless John, why don't you look around the house, see if anything is missing or looks strange.
Check the house, top to bottom. Look for anything that might belong to JonBené that is in place where it shouldn't be.
Were you at that point giving him perhaps a little bit of distraction, busy work?
I wanted to lessen his anxiety by giving him a job to do, a task, a meaningless task.
John took a friend with him. They went to the basement, and John opened the door.
You opened the door to the small room.
I knew instantly what I'd found. I'd found my daughter. She was lying on a white blanket. The blanket was wrapped around her. Her hands were tied above her head. She had tape over her mouth. I immediately knelt down over her, felt her cheek, took the tape off immediately off her mouth. I tried to untie the cord that was around her arms. I couldn't get the knot untied. Picked her up, and I ran upstairs and laid her on the floor and still had a hope that she was alive.
And I see John Ramsey carrying JonBené up the last 3 steps from the basement. She looked like she was sleeping. She had some marks on her face and on her neck. I knelt next to her and I leaned down to her face. And John leaned down opposite, and he asked if she was dead. And I said, yes, she's dead. And as we looked at each other, I remember, and I wore a shoulder holster, tucking my gun right next to me and consciously counting, I've got 18 bullets.
Why did you do that?
Because I didn't know if we'd all be alive when people showed up.
She clearly felt in danger at that moment. She made it clear that she thought John Ramsey killed his daughter and that he might kill her.
Linda Arndt's ability to look in someone's eyes and determine they were a killer is a remarkable talent.
We reached out to Detective Arndt to ask her about her reaction back then, but she did not respond. Ramsey has long been upset with her.
She said, yeah, I saw it in John's eyes. I knew he was guilty. That was the detective that was there that morning.
How is it that you have all these cops searching a home and nobody finds the body, but you ask John Ramsey to go look for things out of the ordinary, and he finds his daughter in a room that had never been opened by anybody in law enforcement? That's crazy.
He lays her on the living room floor where just a few minutes before, friends and neighbors have been walking and, you know, bringing in fibers and whatever to contaminate the scene. And then the coup de grace. He grabs a blanket, which is full of who knows what kind of contaminants, and throws it over the body.
Patsy was being kept out of the room, and I didn't want Patsy to see JonBenét laying there like that.
I remember walking in and seeing her lying there in front of the Christmas tree. I knelt down over her and just laid my body on her body and my cheek against her cheek, and it was cold. And Father Raw was there. And he started saying the last rites, I believe. And I just kept saying, no, no, you know, ask God. Ask God to raise her.
So the kidnapping of JonBenét Ramsey has turned into the murder of JonBenét.
JonBenét Ramsey was violated and murdered in a horrific way. Many injuries to this little girl's body. The x-ray of her skull shows a massive fracture.
This is an 8-inch skull fracture, so we're talking a major blunt force. This is just a massive blow.
But the ultimate cause of her death was strangulation with something called a garrote.
It's a device of a string, and it's wrapped around what ends up being a piece of a paintbrush. And what happens is, as JonBenét is losing consciousness, she's leaning forward. And so this gets tighter and tighter, and you can see how it cuts into my hand. You can see exactly why it cut into her neck. And that ultimately, according to the ME, is what killed her.
If you look at the autopsy report, JonBenét died while being tortured. She was alive while she was being tortured.
There were signs that JonBenét had also been sexually abused. The broken pieces of paintbrush that were used for the garrote were also used to sexually assault her.
There were 4 people in that house, and 1 died overnight. From the very beginning, they suspected the parents.
Within minutes of JonBenét's body being found, this was who they were going to go after. And that's what they did.
The police are thinking, we got to talk to those parents, and we got to talk to them right now before they start getting their story straight together.
When JonBenét's body was brought out past the candy canes decorating the front of the house, there were only a couple of reporters outside to capture that. And then the media frenzy started.
JonBenét Ramsey, the little girl in Colorado, was murdered.
Beauty queen JonBenét. JonBenét's murder has frightened residents of Boulder.
News outlets from around the world had descended upon Boulder and were just hiding in trees and bushes and digging through our trash, following me around town. I mean, it was war.
The JonBenét Ramsey case was completely out of control.
You also have to remember the O.J. Simpson case had wrapped up. The 24-hour news cycle, their content had dried up. And so along came the Ramsey family, and we fit right into that slot.
JonBenét Ramsey was a precocious 6-year-old. She had been strangled to death in the basement of her own home.
You have the shock, this incredibly horrendous crime, and then you have these videos that surface. of this beautiful young girl.
JonBenét Ramsey. Dark blonde hair and green eyes.
Dancing in her costumes, and those were the first viral videos.
She'd like to become an Olympic ice skater.
People who didn't really grow up in the South and understand that industry, the industry of beauty pageants, thought it was the most horrible exploitation of a child they'd ever seen. So when those images started playing across the television, people started thinking, what's wrong with that family?
For many, this was their first glimpse into the world of child pageants, long before shows
Tested 15.
like Toddlers and Tiaras.
Stage number 65, Alana.
But John Ramsey tells me it was something that would bring joy to JonBenét and his wife, Patsy.
The pageant photos came out, and that made it more juicy.
Yeah.
And that was just something that Patsy and JonBenét had fun with.
JonBenét never participated in what I would call a beauty contest. She participated in a talent show.
She would sing and dance?
She would sing, she would dance.
I want to be a cowboy sweetheart. I want to learn to rope and to ride.
These were such a small, minuscule part of what JonBenét was all about. I think it's just because the photographs were so available and so beautiful that it took on a life of its own.
It's part of what turned it into an international circus.
This little girl's image was everywhere overnight.
The biggest negative factor about John and Patsy Ramsey was that they had allowed their daughter to be in child beauty pageant contests, and people did not like them.
But to think they would murder their own daughter was unimaginable, yet police found evidence that, in their minds, pointed towards the Ramseys.
When you start with children of this age, when they die, tend to die at the hands of their parents. So the focus is naturally going to be on the parents to begin with. Now, in the house, the ransom note is written on a pad that belongs to Patsy. This is the notepad. This location right here is where the note was physically found by Patsy. The pen that was used was in the house.
The garrote that was used in JonBenét's murder also got the attention of investigators because of what it was made of.
It basically is an artist's paintbrush that's broken, and what's important is that it actually came from Patsy's art supply.
And there were even fibers on the backside of the duct tape that had been on JonBenét's mouth from Patsy's clothing.
And that was important, but Patsy lived in the house, so those could have been there anyway.
The police started thinking, well, maybe this is just a cover-up, that the Ramseys harmed their child some way, then panicked and tried to create basically a kidnapping scenario.
Patsy and John should have been taken to the police station immediately for separate interviews, for examination of their body for defensive wounds, for collection of their clothing. That never happened.
At this point, they haven't interviewed the mother or father. Not surprisingly, they're still very grief-stricken. They have not been in any kind of condition to be interviewed.
My father, myself, we all marched into that police station, gave blood, we gave hair, we gave fingerprints. The thing that really stuck with me is two detectives hand me their business cards, and one says narcotics officer and the other says auto theft. And I bury my head into my hands because I knew at that point we were in a bad spot.
Though the police had spoken to John Ramsey after JonBenét's body was found, what they really wanted to do was formally interrogate the couple.
The police are thinking, we got to talk to those parents, and we got to talk to them right now before they start getting their story straight together.
Your lawyers advised you then not to submit to police questions. Why not, people say? Wouldn't you have wanted to tell them everything?
Well, I don't recall that our lawyers told us that at the time. We said, yeah, we want to keep working with you, but can't you come here? We can't go out. Patsy was in bed. Patsy was barely able to move. We were perfectly willing and anxious to work with the police to find the killer. We had a higher priority at that point, and that was to bury our daughter.
The family is flying the body back to Atlanta for burial.
On New Year's Eve, JonBenét was laid to rest just outside Atlanta, Georgia.
This service is in loving memory of JonBenét Patricia Ramsey.
We flew back to Atlanta to bury JonBenét. Atlanta being our home. Atlanta being where my oldest sister Beth is buried.
We give thanks today for JonBenét, for the love that she had for her parents.
I want to go back to the funeral.
Whatever we do, we're gonna go through it together. We may not get far, but sure as the star, wherever we are, it's together.
Wherever we are, it's together.
We sang that. She and I sang that together. We'd sing it driving in the car, and we just knew that we would always be together in everything. I wanted my children to know that I was with them through thick and thin, regardless of what happened in life. You know, unconditional love.
Oh, look at that. You can go places now.
Everybody wanted to see these parents. Everybody wanted to talk to these parents, especially the police.
When you realized that you two were the prime suspects, what did you think?
The Boulder police did not interrogate the Ramseys, but they remained the main suspects. Many people found the Ramseys' behavior peculiar and suspicious, and from that, many presumed they must be guilty.
When you realized that you two were the prime suspects, what did you think? What did you feel? What did you say?
Well, we were outraged. We were shocked. How could they think that? We were a normal family.
I just didn't believe it. You just can't believe it. I mean, we're suffering from having lost our child. And then for someone to accuse you, it's just, you can't believe that would happen.
Then 6 days after the murder, they go on CNN and say they didn't do it.
If anyone knows anything, please help us.
We've sensed from our friends that this tragedy has touched not just ourselves and our friends, but many people.
As a mother, my heart went out to this couple.
And if I were a resident of Boulder, I would tell my friends to keep your babies close to you. There's someone out there.
Some people thought it was odd they were talking to the public rather than to the police.
You did an interview on CNN. Why did you do that?
We did it reluctantly and at the insistence of some friends who could see that we were being painted as guilty.
Unfortunately, at that time, we were so, when we look back at it, we were so distraught and medicated. It was probably not giving the impression that he had hoped we would achieve.
Police end their 10-day search of the Ramsey house and remove the crime scene tape.
It is unknown if the family intends to resume residency at the home. We have no comment on the whereabouts of the family at this time.
Starting from the beginning of this case, we, the media, blacked up what the Boulder Police Department wanted to tell us about what they were doing in the JonBenét Ramsey case.
For the most part, the police didn't say much. They didn't leak a lot of information. But when they did, it was major. They thought the mother did it.
Some people who believe Patsy killed her daughter believe it was over bedwetting and then staged it to look like an intruder. The bedwetting theory was a big theory at the time.
I'm a cancer survivor of stage 4 cancer. When you are standing on the brink of death with a terminal illness, your priorities suddenly line up. Bedwetting is totally insignificant. I love my children. I wouldn't harm them for anything in the world.
But many Americans were riveted by the possibility that the Ramseys might have done this.
Some of the authorities have said that you staged this. that you loosely tied your daughter's hands, that you put the noose, the garrote, to make it look as if some terrible person had done this, that this whole picture was staged.
Well, that's absurd. This was done by a terrible person. The garrote was deeply embedded in JonBenét's throat. Her hands were tightly bound. I couldn't get the knot untied. I tried to get it untied even before I brought her upstairs. And to say that we accidentally murdered our daughter and then staged this
If we
is
had
nonsense.
staged it, why would we have disturbed it? Mr. and Mrs. Ramsey, did either of you have anything to do with the death of your daughter?
No.
No. Mr. Ramsey, did you kill JonBenét?
No, I did not.
Mrs. Ramsey, did you kill your daughter?
No, I did not kill my daughter.
How do you feel when I ask you these questions?
Insulted, pain, hurtful. How can I tell you how much I love my daughter? I love her from the depths of my being. It's just unimaginable.
There was a Gallup poll at the time that said something like 70% of the American public thought that you or your wife were guilty.
I remember reading that. And it's like, well, I get it. That's what you were told over and over again.
There's so many puzzle pieces here that just don't fit.
Do you really think your daughter's murderer will be found?
Yes, I do. Because the killer has never been pursued. An objective, wide investigation hasn't taken place. The parents have been focused on it. That's all that's been done.
I think it's solvable. I really believe it's solvable given today's technology.
There are a lot of people in this country who hope that that crime is solved in your lifetime.
The suspect might be out there and be someone who's completely unknown, who has never been on anyone's radar.
What we know is that just within a few mile radius of the Ramseys' home, there was approximately 38 to 40 sex offenders in that area. And the question is, have they all been completely vetted?
And decades later, granddaughters of one of the investigators joined the search for the killer.
There's a lot more evidence to cover and more myths to debunk.
But I do want to get the truth out there.
Was it an accident? Was it intentional? Premeditated?
I want to say something to the person or persons that took this baby from us. The list of suspects narrows. Soon there will be no one on the list but you.
Our killer is JonBenét. How many victims has he had in the past? And how many victims is he going to have in the future?
Tonight, the new focus on one of the most haunting unsolved cases of the last 30 years. Will the spotlight push the police for further DNA testing?
I just need some specifics from the police. Are you doing this? Are you doing this?
Now, new interviews.
They targeted you, John. They wanted to hurt you. And they did that by killing your daughter.
What you've never heard before from Patsy Ramsey.
The police were more concerned with feeding the frenzy of media sharks every day than in finding the killer of our daughter.
The detective who left the police to pursue his own investigation.
Lou dedicated a big part of his life to finding JonBenét's murderer.
Detective Lou Smith was like, whoa.
He just said, I have a name. I want you to write it down.
Is the answer in the list he left behind?
Our grandfather was a detective on one of the biggest unsolved murders in our generation.
Do you think if they'd taken the help offered 28 years ago, this case would have been solved by now?
Oh, yeah. I have no doubt.
There's a good opportunity to really find out who did this.
JonBenét was an entertainer. She would entertain at the drop of a hat.
She loved to sing and dance and perform. It was a natural for her.
I competed with JonBenét. She had all these wonderful costumes and outfits, and she had this presence. about JonBenet?
It wasn't really a competition to her. It was more of like, this is fun, like let's go on stage and do that.
My name is JonBenet Ramsey and I'm 5.5.
What is your favorite animal at the zoo?
The monkeys, because they laugh and stuff and hang around.
Today, JonBenet Ramsey would have been 34 years old.
I was her age. She would be my age now. She would be pursuing her own career. She never got to grow up. She is frozen in time now.
Well, the police were convinced pretty early on that Patsy and/or John were involved. And you had a district attorney's office that was saying, not so fast. And that created enormous tension between the two.
Did you hear anything yesterday? I think there are some new developments.
Alex Hunter, the district attorney, wanted someone to come in with fresh eyes in this case and look at it from the perspective of a defense attorney. Who might have killed JonBenet as an intruder, not just the parents, but from the outside?
Boulder DA Alex Hunter brought Lou Smit out of retirement to help solve the Ramsey case.
One of the great challenges is to try to do the case right. And, I think we're making efforts to meet that challenge by involving people like Lou Smit.
My name is Lou Smit. I'm a retired homicide detective from the Colorado Springs Police Department.
Legendary guy. And he said, I follow the evidence. I have got to follow the evidence. Doesn't matter what my opinion is, what I might think. I follow the evidence. And he did. And that takes a lot of discipline.
Smit had a history of closing cases.
He had such tenacity. He was a bulldog. Once he got something in his mind, once he got the reins in his teeth, he was not letting go.
Lou Smit was my father. He was just known as, the detective that solved cases. When he got to a murder scene, he spent time dictating everything he saw. Where the sun was in the sky, what the weather conditions were like, what the neighboring houses looked like.
The legend of Lou Smit is now the stuff of podcasts with granddaughters Jessa and Lexi unspooling the crime for a new generation.
He advocated for the victim and stood in their shoes.
So that's why we've chosen The Victim's Shoes as our podcast name. Prior to this case, Lou Smit had investigated over 200 homicide cases that led to arrests and convictions. Lou dedicated a big part of his life to finding JonBenet's murderer. When he started his investigation, he felt like everybody else did, that it was probably one of the two parents.
It seemed as though the parents were probably involved in it. I thought this would be a fairly easy case. I thought it would be a slam dunk. And I even remember talking to my daughter. I kind of joked with her, saying that, if somebody did get in the house, it must have been Santa Claus coming down the chimney.
It was within a couple of days after my dad started on the investigation, when he had a chance to review pictures, the evidence, that he was already saying, I think that they need to look the other way. He was already noting in his journal that he felt that they needed to look at an intruder.
Lou came up with the intruder theory. You can't think about that theory without associating it with Lou Smit.
The first thing that stood out to him was an open window in the basement. There was a suitcase propped up against it.
He didn't buy the Boulder Police Department's conclusion that no one could get in that basement window. He began to say maybe somebody did get into that house.
And I'll show you how easily it can be done.
So what did Lou Smit do? He went and climbed in the window himself with a camera rolling to prove that it could be done.
It really wasn't that difficult coming in that window.
But is Smit's own theory compromised by the very crime scene photos he himself has studied?
There are cobwebs in the window, which could support that no one did go through this window. The big question is, could you have gotten through this window, this small window, without disturbing this cobweb? I think the answer to that is maybe. But the other important point is, how soon was this picture taken after JonBenét was killed because spiders can replicate webs very fast.
Also found in the basement by JonBenét's body, a shoe print, a high-tech brand that did not match any of the shoes in the Ramseys' house.
The investigators believe, and maybe rightly so, that that's the bad guy's footprint.
The counter-argument is that footprint image could have been inadvertently left by police officers at the scene, but a more disturbing image in Lou Smith's investigation comes from 2 marks left on JonBenét's face and back.
The marks themselves, both on the back and on the face, were the same distance apart. Suddenly a little light went on, and it was just like, wait a minute, it was a stun gun.
Smith looked at other murders where a stun gun was known to have been used. He examined photos of a crime victim who had a known stun gun wound.
And the marks are very similar to the face of JonBenét.
He also looked into an experiment performed using stun guns on pigs. These marks were also the same as the marks found on JonBenét.
When we did the pigs, we get perfect marks, just almost like on the back of JonBenét.
This brings back our grandpa's whole motto that things are usually what they seem. Don't make it complicated.
To make things less complicated, Smith transferred all his knowledge and thoughts about the case to VHS tape, leaving behind a 6-hour video presentation of his intruder theory.
There's no reason at all for the Ramseys to use a stun gun, and the Ramseys don't have a stun gun. If it's not a stun gun, what is it? That's the question I always ask. You tell me what it is.
Lou Smith stood up and said, wait a second, we need to look at this again. It actually is possible. It actually is plausible. And in his mind, it's actually the most likely scenario. But there have been challenges from the beginning of this case. There were published reports that the Boulder Police Department refused to accept assistance from outside law enforcement.
Denver police called and offered 2 experienced homicide detectives to come work at Boulder under their direction full-time. They turned it down.
Do you think if they'd taken the help offered 28 years ago, this case would have been solved by now?
Oh, yeah. I have no doubt. I've been told by experienced homicide detectives over the years, this is not a hard case to solve, but they needed to be on it immediately.
Lou Smith thought that the Ramseys were being targeted unfairly.
Thought there was something drastically wrong. I had seen evidence of an intruder.
One thing the police and the district attorney do agree on, both want the Ramseys to come in for a formal videotaped interrogation. And when that day finally comes, it gets heated.
Go back to the damn drawing board. I didn't do it.
Within a few weeks of JonBenét's murder, police had an important clue. The discovery of foreign DNA found underneath her fingernails and in her underwear.
DNA that does not match the Ramsey family, and it shows a foreign male presence. They sat on that for months.
They knew at the time that there was DNA in her panties. That it was mixed foreign DNA, and that it was not the Ramsey's DNA. Not Patsy's, not John's, and not Burke's.
Detective Lou Smith was like, whoa, while you're pouring water all over the intruder theory, you're not revealing that you have unidentified DNA and it doesn't match anybody in the Ramsey family.
Lou is just incensed that the focus is still being, well, it could be Patsy, maybe we need to get her to confess.
The police had eventually interviewed the couple 4 months after JonBenét's death. But now authorities want the Ramseys to come in again for videotaped interrogation.
There were months and months of negotiations. Things about whether they could be videotaped. What are the questions going to be? Should the Boulder police be a part of it? Because the Ramseys said, we don't trust the police. We don't want them there.
Ultimately, the interrogation took place at a different police department, and the Boulder police had to watch it from another building.
The Ramseys finally sit down with the police for 3 days of videotaped interrogations in June 1998, a year and a half after JonBenét's murder.
We were there for as long as they wanted, would have stayed for 2 weeks had they wanted. The myth that we didn't cooperate is nonsense.
When you were interrogated by the police, you were interrogated separately.
Yes.
Today is Wednesday, June the 24th, 1998. I'm president of the Broomfield Police Department, Tricia Ramsey.
Tom Haney, who was one of the most respected homicide detectives out of Denver, was chosen to interview Patsy Ramsey.
Patsy Ramsey had a year and a half to prepare. I knew that it was going to be tough to get a spontaneous response.
Do you ever recall purchasing black duct tape like this? It seems like there can't be a house in the world that doesn't have duct tape because it repairs everything.
Well, I never liked it because it's so gooey. Isn't it gooey?
He started out softly and kindly and curious, and then he got pointed with his questions, and that made Patsy angry.
If I told you right now that we have, in the process of being examined, trace evidence that appears to link you to the death of John Bonet, what would you tell me?
That is totally impossible. Go retest.
How is it impossible?
I did not kill my child. I didn't have a thing to do with it.
She said it was impossible that we had physical evidence linking her to the crime.
I'm talking about scientific evidence.
I don't give a flying flip how scientific it is. Go back to the damn drawing board. I didn't do it. John Ramsey didn't do it, and we didn't have a clue of anybody who did do it.
I am so taken with her swagger. She just tells them, you know, you think you have some evidence on me? Well, you better look again.
We left that child, okay? We're not involved. Read my lips. Let's find out who is. My life has been hell from that day forward. And I can't stand the thought of thinking somebody's out here walking on the street. God knows they might do it again to some other child. You know, quit screwing around asking me about things that are ridiculous and let's find the person that did this.
Patsy was feisty. She was combative, in stark contrast to John Ramsey, who was interrogated by Lou Smit.
When Lou interviewed someone, he pried anything out of people just by being understanding and really listening.
Now, John, I know this is touching right back on a very dark spot, but was this tape wrapped around anywhere? Was it stuck down? It was very firm across her lips.
Reached out, flipped the latch, opened the door, and knew immediately what I found.
Okay, and you say immediately?
There was a white blanket, and I just knew I'd found her.
How were you standing with her?
The interrogation tapes are intriguing to watch as there's a lot of raw emotion shown by both John and Patsy Ramsey. But the bottom line is both John and Patsy deny that anyone in their family killed John Bonet. And there was nothing revealed that allowed for charges to be brought against them.
And we want to do everything we can to help solve this case for you.
My dad's conclusions after that interview were just firmed up his belief that the Ramseys had nothing to do with this murder.
I'm not saying parents don't kill their kid. Parents do kill their children. So, but they're trying to say, Patsy, that their actions before, during, and after are all consistent with innocent people. You didn't do it.
My dad started getting frustrated as time went on because he felt that the case against the Ramseys was being slanted where no other evidence was coming in.
I thought there was something drastically wrong and that there was a gross injustice in this case. I had seen evidence of an intruder in the house that night.
Lou Smit thought that the Ramseys were being targeted unfairly, and he didn't believe the police were listening to him.
Smit so strongly disagrees with the prosecutor's focus on the Ramseys that he is resigning from the case, saying, "The case tells me John and Patsy Ramsey did not kill their daughter."
He wrote a letter to Alex Hunter telling them that he couldn't be a part of the persecution of these people, is how he termed it.
He wrote, "I intend to stand with this family and somehow help them through this and find the killer of their daughter."
My dad may have resigned from the district attorney's office, but he never stopped work on the case. He walked in JonBenet's shoes, and he owed it to her, he felt, to continue his investigation.
One thing Lou Smit fought to do was tell a grand jury his side of the story, the intruder theory. There were too many unanswered questions. In particular, that male DNA in JonBenet's underwear that didn't match anyone that they knew of. Who could it be?
Grand jurors arrived at the Boulder County Justice Center this morning and were escorted into the courthouse by sheriff's deputies.
There was enormous pressure on District Attorney Alex Hunter to call for a grand jury, and it took him almost 2 years to actually call one. I think it was the media pressure and pressure from the police that forced him to make that call.
A lot of work went into it. You have to remember, this case was happening just after other high-profile murder cases in the country.
What did you think of your parents at that point by October 31st?
I thought they were these great people that I had killed.
From the Menendez brothers to O.J. Simpson.
O.J. did it!
Those high-profile cases were on most of the country's mind.
Good morning, Counsel.
Most people think the evidence of Simpson's guilt was insurmountable.
We, the jury, in the above entitled action, find the defendant, Orenthal James Simpson, not guilty of the crime of murder.
And yet, he walked. Alex remembered that. He told me one time, "I don't want to spend 2 years of my life and $5 million of the taxpayers' money and lose in court."
Alex Hunter sat a grand jury for 13 months.
Are you surprised by anything you've seen?
No. Over 13 months, those people heard over 100 witnesses.
My name is Jonathan Webb. I was a grand juror on the JonBenet Ramsey case. It bothers me that the murder of a little girl like this has gone on unsolved for essentially a quarter century.
Members of the grand jury looking like detectives themselves as they finally toured the Ramsey house.
From a crime scene perspective, it was very disturbing how she was found. She's on a concrete floor, a garrote around her neck, and she's 6 years old. That's pretty horrible.
Webb told us that the grand jury spent most of their time focused on two main issues. First, who wrote that ransom note?
We heard from 3 handwriting experts, and even though the handwriting experts couldn't definitively say that she wrote it, they all 3 came to the same conclusion that it could have been Patsy Ramsey.
The Ramsey's defense team had their own experts who said that the comparison between the writing on the ransom note and Patsy's handwriting was not conclusive.
And the grand jury believed that she wrote it.
The second focus for the grand jury, according to Jonathan Webb, was the viability of the intruder theory.
Smit actually presented his intruder theory to the grand jury.
This is the very first photo taken of the training room basement window. The window is wide open. Now, if I was a detective, I'd have said, wow, this is entry.
But the grand jury wasn't buying the intruder theory because of those cobwebs in the window.
The intruder theory didn't make sense to the grand jury. The Boulder police had photographed cobwebs. So for someone to get through a small opening like that and not disturbing a cobweb would be remarkable.
A grand jury doesn't decide guilt or innocence the way a regular jury does. The grand jury is only there to decide whether or not there's probable cause to charge the suspects with a crime.
We were troubled by, to what level of confidence do we need to have to vote to indict? And it's the preponderance of the evidence, which means greater than 50%. And soon after that, we voted to indict.
The grand jury was looking at 2 specific accusations for the Ramseys: child abuse resulting in death and accessory to a crime. The grand jury couldn't point the finger at Patsy or John specifically, but they were sure that one of them committed the crime and the other person helped to carry it out.
This is 7 News at 5.
There is high anticipation in Boulder right now for a Ramsey decision, and we are about to hear an announcement from Boulder DA Alex Hunter.
I and my prosecution task force believe we do not have sufficient evidence to warrant the filing of charges against anyone who has been investigated at this time.
I was shocked. It's extremely unusual for a grand jury to vote to charge and the DA not charge.
I think deciding not to prosecute the parents for homicide was the right decision. No matter what you believe about the case, it would have been very difficult to get a conviction.
Thank you very much.
There were too many questions, in particular, that DNA in the underwear that appears to have been from a man didn't match anyone they knew of.
That's why Lou Smit continued investigating even after he resigned from the case.
He had condensed everything he knew about every person of interest into a spreadsheet.
It's like a PowerPoint on steroids. It detailed 887 names.
This whole case has always been DNA. The killer left behind, I believe, part of his DNA.
On their podcast, Lou Smit's granddaughter spoke about his focus on the DNA in the case.
Over nearly 13 years, Lou took all of the information that he had on this case and developed a database. In this particular murder, he thought that DNA would solve this case.
And thanks to major advances in DNA, a number of big surprises were about to come to the case.
What became groundbreaking at the time was a thing called touch DNA. Essentially, when someone touches something, the skin cells they leave behind can be tested.
In 2008, the then district attorney for Boulder, Mary Lacey, decided to do a new round of DNA testing on JonBenét's pajama leggings.
Remember, there was already DNA from an unknown male found under JonBenét's fingernails and in her underwear. But analysis of touch DNA on her leggings uncovered something new. DNA from at least one unknown male, maybe two.
In recent months, investigators used that new procedure, which helped them discover fresh DNA on JonBenét's long johns, left by the killer's fingertips.
Now new DNA analysis proves just that. The Boulder District Attorney clears all members of the Ramsey family in the murder of their 6-year-old daughter, JonBené.
That's a pretty big development. You've got DNA now in 3 places that doesn't match anybody in the Ramsey family. That's a pretty clear indication that somebody else was there. And nobody knows whose DNA it is.
This revelation of this new unmatched DNA drove the district attorney to announce they're no longer looking at the family.
The news broke here at the district attorney's office with this incredible letter to JonBenét's father.
DA Mary Lacey wrote John Ramsey, "We do not consider your immediate family, including you, your wife Patsy, and your son Burke, to be under any suspicion in the commission of this crime."
The DA also apologized to the Ramseys. She wrote in part, "To the extent that we may have contributed in any way to the public perception that you might have been involved in this crime, I am deeply sorry." John Ramsey responded to the DA's letter and the stunning development on a local newscast.
We're certainly grateful for an acknowledgement that we are innocent, that this was an intruder, which of course we've always maintained.
But this is a reminder how often that they are human beings and how often they get it wrong, how often their biases take them down the wrong path.
Somebody told me in the police world, they said the most dangerous thing is a police department that's made up their mind. And that's certainly what happened in our case.
All it takes is one match to the DNA, and you've possibly nailed the killer.
Our killer, JonBenet, how many victims has he had in the past? And how many victims is he going to have in the future? And so this killer could still be murdering even today.
Lou Smit dedicated years to investigating the JonBenet Ramsey murder case. But eventually, he ran out of time.
When he got sick with cancer, he knew that his time was limited. And so during that time, he just talked to others about not letting this case die.
He had people coming every single day, 60 to 70, 80 people a day, coming to see him. And they said their goodbyes. And during that time, he would still talk about the case.
I remember about the last 3 days, he had slipped into a coma, and the conversations would become one way, and I don't know if you could hear me or not.
I'm John Ramsey. I had the opportunity to visit Lou a week before he died. Remarkably, during that time together, Lou talked a lot about the case. He hadn't given up. He never gave up.
Lou Smith's legacy lives on, and his tenacity to solve this case was passed on to his daughter, Cindy Mara.
And he just said, I have a name. I want you to write it down. And I did. And he said, that's where you start.
You know, we'd be glad to pay that. We don't have that electronic report, so we would need Boulder to send it.
After my dad died, a couple of us, our family, and then some of his old homicide partners, we just formed a team.
You want to go down to number 2, because that is an in-state one.
Yep.
What we all share in common is that commitment to fulfill Lou's dying wish, that this case doesn't die with him. And I think it's that devotion, that respect, that love for Lou is what keeps our team moving forward.
According to investigators, there were other possible suspects, including a local Santa in town who had previous interactions with the Ramseys.
There's no way in the world that I could be involved in the death of this little girl. I adored her.
But there's another man who comes forward and claims he's responsible for JonBenet's murder.
I love JonBenet. She died accidentally.
The mystery surrounding the murder of JonBenet Ramsey haunted Lou Smith until the day he died. But he left behind that detailed list, hoping that one day JonBenet's killer would finally be brought to justice.
He had condensed everything he knew about every person of interest into a spreadsheet.
It was like a PowerPoint on steroids. The spreadsheet detailed 887 names.
He wanted us to take the list that he had and try and keep the case alive.
Out of those 887 entries, by the time he went into hospice, Lou had marked 134 cleared.
Over the years, there have been many leads that seemed promising at one time or another.
That new Netflix documentary, Making News, details how just months after JonBenet's murder, a 12-year-old girl who lived less than 2 miles from the Ramseys was attacked as she slept in her bed.
Sometime in the late hours, Mom hears a noise going on.
And there was, in fact, an intruder in her daughter's bedroom preparing to molest her. That person has never been identified. That girl had attended the same dance studio as JonBenet. Are the two cases connected? I don't know.
Boulder police said that while the two cases had some similarities, they found no definitive connection.
In the search for the killer, investigators chased down countless leads, including a local transient.
Here you have Gary Oliva, who apparently on the night or the next day after JonBenet was killed, called a friend and told him over the phone that he had hurt a child.
All of a sudden I get a phone call, and it's Gary, and he's sobbing into the phone like I've never heard anybody sob in my entire life. I hurt a little girl.
He was a homeless man who hung out at a church just a block and a half from the Ramseys' home. And he confessed that he killed JonBenet Ramsey.
They took a look at him, but eventually eliminated him because There is absolutely no connection between he and the Ramseys, and his DNA, they used that to eliminate him.
Investigators also looked into Bill McReynolds, a local Santa Claus who'd worked at the Ramseys' holiday parties.
JonBenet had made a comment that he, Bill McReynolds, was coming to their house to see JonBenet. I think everybody thought that was a little weird. His DNA didn't match, and he's out of the picture.
And then Alex Hunter, the Boulder County District Attorney, speaks directly to the killer.
I want to say something to the person or persons that committed this crime. The list of suspects narrows. Soon there will be no one on the list but you.
A day after the DA rattles the cage, a man named Michael Helgoth attracts the attention of authorities.
Michael Helgoth evidently committed suicide the day after the Boulder District Attorney threatened that, hey, we're going to find you.
The death of this child has broken all of our hearts. We will see that justice is served in this case and that you pay for what you did.
That speech was designed to get the killer nervous.
When Michael was found dead, there was a stun gun at his residence. Also, there was a pair of high-tech boots.
These two clues had previously been linked to JonBenet's murder.
Stun gun, a bit odd for people to have. High-tech boots, fairly common thing for people to have. But the real clincher would be DNA didn't match, and he has no connection to the Ramsey family.
And so investigators also eliminate Helgoth as a person of interest.
Investigators finally felt they had a real break in the case with John Mark Carr. He famously claimed he was with JonBenet when she died.
I love JonBenet, and died accidentally. No.
Her death was an accident.
So you were in the basement?
Yes.
Problem is, he wasn't in Boulder, Colorado when she died, and his DNA didn't match.
Even though Carr claimed he was in the basement when JonBenet died, there was just no physical evidence linking him to her murder. And so Carr was eliminated as a suspect.
Take a look at it.
Decades later, the search still goes on for the little girl's killer.
What our team has been doing is focusing on collecting DNA and testing DNA.
I think it's imperative that we investigate every credible suspect that's been provided.
If we keep at it, hopefully we'll finally whittle it down to one person remaining on that list.
Do you think you know who the killer is?
You know, no, I don't. And this is a very dark, evil person. I don't know anybody like that.
But could advances in DNA technology finally help catch the person who killed JonBenet? The JonBenet Ramsey case is just as mysterious today as it was in 1996, when her devastated parents were left with tiny mementos from their daughter to hold on to.
It makes me sad that there were happy little hands in this glove. Now they're gone.
So the memories bring tears to your eyes, but you're also a little more at peace?
I don't know. I don't think I will be at peace until we find out who did this.
For Patsy Ramsey, sadly, her fight to find her daughter's killer ended in 2006 when she passed away.
Patsy died of ovarian cancer.
Yes.
Went through all of that without knowing that she'd been cleared.
That's correct.
She was buried next to JonBenet in Marietta, Georgia. But the search for justice continues.
I think it's even more mysterious now to some degree because who the heck was in that house? How'd they get in? Why'd they target her?
Lou Smith's family, dedicated to keeping the case moving forward, continues to work on whittling down a list they presented to law enforcement in 2020.
And what we presented was a confidential list of our top 20 people of interest and the list of the 8 people of interest that our team had eliminated through DNA analysis.
The technology has just advanced so tremendously. JonBenét's blood was mixed with an unknown male DNA in her underpants, and we need to separate out those two profiles, which can be done now, and use genealogical DNA, which has been a huge tool in solving cold cases recently.
That technique has solved some old, dead cold cases. That's what we're asking the police to do.
Well, DNA science has progressed significantly since the early years of the JonBenet investigation, and investigators can now work with smaller, mixed, and degraded samples. There are still significant hurdles.
What will be your message to the Boulder Police Department today?
Look, just tell us, are you using one of these very cutting-edge labs to do additional DNA testing? If you are doing additional DNA testing, that's all I need to know.
According to the Boulder PD, investigators are utilizing outside labs and experts in the latest technology.
Our collaboration also includes the Colorado Cold Case Review Team, which is a panel of outside experts brought together in December of 2023 to review this case. Our department has had ongoing conversations with JonBenét's family, the last of which occurred in mid-2024. Our goal is to find JonBenet Ramsey's killer. Our commitment to that has never wavered.
The family has not lost the will to fight and the will to find the killer. If we can find the killer, then the next generation doesn't have to live with that trauma and the unknown and the speculation. If we leverage the evidence, we follow the facts, we will find this killer. My dad certainly suffered a tremendous amount, but I think he's focused on life today and enjoying life with his family and grandkids, and he's remarried.
But he says he's still always thinking of JonBenet, trying to focus on the positive of this beautiful little girl who will always be forever young.
She knew she was loved. I mean, we told her that every day. Somebody asked me once, what would you say to JonBenet if you could? I would tell her, I'm sorry, I didn't protect you. You know, I had JonBenet bless my life for 6 years. And she really was a blessing.
The Boulder DA tells 2020 that the office is continuing to work with federal, state, and local agencies to make progress on this tragic case.
And David, Lou Smith's family says they're determined to continue making their way through that list. We're going to stay on this story. That's our program for tonight. I'm Deborah Roberts.
And I'm David Muir from all of us here at 2020 and ABC News. Good night.
That anyone in their family killed JonBenet, and there was nothing revealed that allowed for charges to be brought against them.
And we want to do everything we can to help solve this case for you.
My dad's conclusions after that interview were just firmed up his belief that the Ramseys had nothing to do with this murder.
I'm not saying parents don't kill their kid. Parents do kill their children. So, but they're trying to say, Patsy, that their actions before, during, and after are all consistent with innocent people. They didn't do it.
My dad started getting frustrated as time went on because he felt that the case against the Ramseys was being slanted where no other evidence was coming in.
I thought there was something drastically wrong and that there was a gross injustice in this case. I had seen...
Let your whole life be a mess. When the tide rises, the sea stirs and sings. It's the unique heart. You are like a bright red rose, always fragrant and seductive. I see you coming back in my sleep. The nostalgia's overflowing, it cannot be quenched. The nostalgia is gentle and very gentle. A nostalgia is gentle and very gentle.
O.J. Simpson.
O.J. did it!
Those high-profile cases were on most of the country's mind.
Good morning, Counsel.
Most people think the evidence of Simpson's guilt was insurmountable.
We, the jury, in the above entitled action, find the defendant, Orenthal James Simpson, not guilty of the crime of murder.
And yet, he walked. Alex remembered that. He told me one time, I don't want to spend 2 years of my life and $5 million of the taxpayers' money and lose in court.
Alex Hunter sat a grand jury for 13 months.
Are you surprised by anything you've seen?
No.
Over 13 months, those people heard over 100 witnesses.
My name is Jonathan Webb. I was a grand juror on the JonBenét Ramsey case. It bothers me that the murder of a little girl like this has gone on unsolved for essentially a quarter century.
Members of the grand jury looking like detectives themselves as they finally toured the Ramsey house.
From a crime scene perspective, it was very disturbing how she was found. She's on a concrete floor, a garrote around her neck, and she's 6 years old. That's pretty horrible.
Webb told us that the grand jury spent most of their time focused on two main issues. First, who wrote that ransom note?
We heard from 3 handwriting experts, and even though the handwriting experts couldn't definitively say that she wrote it, they all 3 came to the same conclusion that it could have been Patsy Ramsey.
The Ramsey's defense team had their own experts who said that the comparison between the writing on the ransom note and Patsy's handwriting was not conclusive.
And the grand jury believed that she wrote it.
The second focus for the grand jury, according to Jonathan Webb, was the viability of the intruder theory.
Smith actually presented his intruder theory to the grand jury.
This is the very first photo taken of a training room basement window. The window is wide open. Now, if I was a detective, I'd have said, wow, this is entry.
But the grand jury wasn't buying the intruder theory because of those cobwebs in the window.
The intruder theory didn't make sense to the grand jury. The Boulder police had photographed cobwebs. So for someone to get through a small opening like that and not disturbing a cobweb would be remarkable.
A grand jury doesn't decide guilt or innocence the way a regular jury does. The grand jury is only there to decide whether or not there's probable cause to charge the suspects with a crime.
We were troubled by, to what level of confidence do we need to have to vote to indict? And it's the preponderance of the evidence, which means greater than 50%. And soon after that, we voted to indict.
The grand jury was looking at 2 specific accusations for the Ramseys: child abuse resulting in death and accessory to a crime. The grand jury couldn't point the finger at Patsy or John specifically, but they were sure that one of them committed the crime and the other person helped to carry it out.
This is 7 News at 5.
There is high anticipation in Boulder right now for a Ramsey decision, and we are about to hear an announcement from Boulder DA Alex Hunter.
I and my prosecution task force believe we do not have sufficient evidence to warrant the filing of charges against anyone who has been investigated at this time.
I was shocked. It's extremely unusual for a grand jury to vote to charge and the DA not charge.
I think deciding not to prosecute the parents for homicide was the right decision. No matter what you believe about the case, it would have been very difficult to get a conviction.
Thank you very much.
There were too many questions, in particular, that DNA in the underwear that appears to have been from a man didn't match anyone they knew of.
That's why Lou Smith continued investigating even after he resigned from the case.
He had condensed everything he knew about every person of interest into a spreadsheet.
It's like a PowerPoint on steroids. It detailed 887 names.
left behind, I believe, part of his DNA.
On their podcast, Lou Smith's granddaughter spoke about his focus on the DNA in the case.
Over nearly 13 years, Lou took all of the information that he had on this case and developed a database. In this particular murder, he thought that DNA would solve this case.
And thanks to major advances in DNA, a number of big surprises were about to come to the case.
What became groundbreaking at the time was a thing called touch DNA. Essentially, when someone touches something, the skin cells they leave behind can be tested.
In 2008, the then district attorney for Boulder, Mary Lacey, decided to do a new round of DNA testing on JonBenét's pajama leggings.
Remember, there was already DNA from an unknown male found under JonBenét's fingernails and in her underwear. But analysis of touch DNA on her leggings uncovered something new. DNA from at least one unknown male, maybe two.
In recent months, investigators used that new procedure, which helped them discover fresh DNA on JonBenét's long johns, left by the killer's fingertips.
Now new DNA analysis proves just that. The Boulder District Attorney clears all members of the Ram.
Complete the life from the top. I want my love to be like the ocean. Let your whole life be immense. When the tide rises, the sea stirs and sinks. It's that yearning heart. You are like a bright red rose, always fragrant and seductive. I see you coming back in my face. The nostalgia's overflowing and cannot be quenched. I want my love to be like the ocean. Let your whole life be immense. When the tide rises, the sea stirs and sinks.
This is a reminder how often that they are human beings and how often they get it wrong, how often their biases take them down the wrong path.
Somebody told me in the police world, they said the most dangerous thing is a police department that's made up their mind. And that's really what happened in our case.
All it takes is one match to the DNA, and you've possibly nailed the killer.
Our killer, JonBenet, how many victims has he had in the past? And how many victims is he going to have in the future? And so this killer could still be murdering even today.
Lou Smith dedicated years to investigating the JonBenet Ramsey murder case. But eventually, he ran out of time.
When he got sick with cancer, he knew that his time was limited. And so during that time, he just talked to others about not letting this case die.
He had people coming every single day, 60 to 70, 80 people a day, coming to see him. And they said their goodbyes. And during that time, he would still talk about the case.
I remember about the last 3 days, he had slipped into a coma, and the conversations would become one way, and I don't know if you could hear me or not.
I'm John Ramsey. I had the opportunity to visit Lou a week before he died. Remarkably, during that time together, Lou talked a lot about the case. He hadn't given up. He never gave up.
Lou Smith's legacy lives on, and his tenacity to solve this case was passed on to his daughter, Cindy Mara.
And he just said, I have a name. I want you to write it down. And I did. And he said, that's where you start. You know, we'd be glad to pay that. We don't have that electronic report, so we would need Boulder to send it. After my dad died, a couple of us, our family, and then some of his old homicide partners, we just formed a team.
You want to go down to number 2 because that is an in-state one.
Yep.
What we all share in common is that commitment to fulfill Lou's dying wish.